What methylene blue does is it concentrates in the mitochondria in your cells. And so you can look at the mitochondria in a cell with a microscope if you have methylene blue around. Something's happening in the mitochondria. Why is it concentrating there? Methylene blue had this capacity to help with energy production more holistically than any other compound that we could find. It not only helped you make energy, ATP, but it also helped you detox from the energy that you make. Toxins in our environment, everything from our food, water, to our makeup, is causing toxicity to the mitochondria directly.
I think the fact that all of you are doctors and involved in the message of the methylene blue, I thought, oh, then maybe we have a chance to really understand it.
You can use these very low doses and you can compensate for any blockage that could be on the chain of proteins that's in your mitochondria that's responsible for making energy. We found that there's a lot of great studies using a lower dose, around 16 milligrams, especially for neurocognitive performance. The beautiful thing about methylene blue is that.
Hi, everyone. So today we're going to be diving deep into something that's been flying under the radar for far too long, methylene blue. I'm joined today by Dr. Scott Sherr, a leading expert in integrative medicine, and he breaks it all down, why this little known compound is making waves in the world of health, performance, and even recovery. Methylene blue has been around. It's been around for over a century, but recent research is revealing its powerful effects on mitochondrial function, something like 93% of Americans are dysfunctional in, brain health, and even endurance performance. We talk about how it works, because I'm just trying to figure that out, why it's been called the magic bullet for energy production and detoxification, and how it's helping both elite athletes and everyday people feel and function better. So if you've ever been curious about longevity, mental clarity, and optimizing your health from the inside out, you won't want to miss this conversation. Let's go. Dr. Scott Sherr, welcome to the show.
And great to be here.
You're the first person, and we're going to be calling this the green room eventually.
Yeah, I love it.
And the double metaphor on that is that a green room is in when you, and I'm not a surfer, but that's inside the tube.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
And it's also the room you get snacks before you go to do a TV show.
That's how I think about it. I'm sure that's how you know a green room.
That's how I know a green room.
Sure.
I've never been inside the green room. So in getting ready for this, I thought, wow, what an interesting path that you've taken. And I always really appreciate when people sort of take one path, but then that leads them to making all these other choices.
Sure.
So maybe before we dive into parts of this conversation, you can just share sort of your background, your training, and then we can leap off from there.
That sounds good. Yeah. So I'm the son of a chiropractor, and he's been a chiropractor for 45 years. It's Dr. Alan Sherr. And so I grew up very alternatively, very out of the box. My dad was sort of militant against the conventional system for many years, actually. But he had limitations as to what he could do. But I grew up in his office. I was coloring in the front rooms. I was adjusted when I was born and throughout my childhood. And then I always knew being in that environment. When I was in high school, I actually worked at his front desk and I would collect money. I was very good at that, actually. I knew the money was going towards my college, right? So I had to make sure that the money was coming in. And so funny, my brother actually, who's younger than me, would work at the front desk and he was like, you can pay next time. I'm like, no, pay now. And so when I got a lot of experience in his office, I really enjoyed the patient care, that aspect of things. But when I decided to go to professional school, I actually decided on conventional training. And this is actually interesting, right? Because I grew up very alternatively. But the idea for me was, a chiropractor, I saw that he had limitations as to what he could do with his license. And he always would say, if I had to do this over again, I would probably be a medical doctor so that I could do anything that I wanted. I'm like, well, I guess that's what I have to do.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward, and that's not always the case as a medical doctor because you have a license to protect. But in general, yes, medical doctors have more gravitas. They have more clout in the system overall. So I ended up going to medical school in Baltimore at the University of Maryland. And I spent my 4 years there in training in medical school, and then 3 years after that as an internal medicine resident. And I did my internal medicine training from there. But I always went with the idea that I would not be just becoming like a regular doctor. I always had this sort of high-minded idea that I could figure out a way to bridge this, at the time, a huge chasm between conventional medicine and at that time it was just called alternative medicine. There was no functional medicine. There was no integrative medicine. These things were starting, but they were very, very small overall. And then when I was in medical school, I learned about this particular technology called hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And I found it amazing and transformative in the acute setting in people with burns and severe infections and soft tissue issues, carbon monoxide poisoning. And I got very interested in this technology because it was being used outside the US for amazing healing for things like strokes and traumatic brain injuries and chronic pain. And so I kind of decided relatively early on in medical school, maybe I was in my third year, that I would be getting more involved in that once I finished my training. But it took time, right? I had to go through a lot of training to get out of internal medicine residency. But then once I did, then I started becoming more involved in hyperbaric medicine. And I created an integrative practice around that particular technology that has evolved and continues to evolve over the last decade or so, or more now. And it started off as just hyperbaric therapy. Then I kind of integrated lots of things around it and tools, technologies, practices. But it was missing something really important, which was a foundation. And the foundation was, I realized very quickly that if you put somebody into a hyperbaric chamber too soon and they weren't optimized enough, that they wouldn't do as well as I would anticipate. And sometimes they get worse, or they get a little bit better and they would get worse again. And so I found that you needed a base. And that's when I met a very smart guy named Dr. Ted Achacoso, who had started this nonprofit organization called Health Optimization Medicine in Practice, or Home Hope for short. Yeah. And it was a 7-module certification course for practitioners, licensed and non-licensed. And I was mentored by him, and we started the nonprofit together, which I'm still a part of. And that became the foundation of my practice. And so health optimization medicine is what I do as my foundation to help people optimize before anything else that they do, including hyperbaric therapy. So I think that's the quick story as best I can.
It's so funny. I think think of you, picking in your third year of medical school, like, oh, I'm going to work with hyperbaric chambers.
Yeah.
How wildly unpopular and fringe that was at the time. I think there's a lot of things people want to pursue, but they are scared and they're not getting support.
Yeah.
Like, you're not getting support from, the people at your medical school going, that is a great idea.
Yeah, I never really thought I would go to medical school and people would understand anything about me.
So you were prepared already?
Oh, I was totally prepared. Yeah, because I grew up so out of that system. And so when people were doing any number of things in medical school, I was like, why are you people doing this? Like, there was free pizza parties like 3 times a week. Like, why are you guys eating that? Like, that's terrible. Like, I grew up on crazy diets. I grew up on macrobiotic diets, on carob. What was it? Like the chocolate, but not chocolate.
Of course. My mother tried to get that on me too.
Oh yeah. I hated it, but that's
carob has a weird little taste after at the end, doesn't it?
It's got this aftertaste to it. Yeah. And that's the only thing that I was able to eat. I didn't have any dairy until I was maybe 8 or 9. And then of course I was lactose intolerant after that because I had never had any dairy before. So I grew up very strange. Yeah. And so I knew that I had to keep some of that strangeness to me as yourself. I was going through it. Yeah. So I went to,
Did your dad almost poo-poo the fact that you were going to, quote, real medical school?
No, he was actually excited. And he knew that he had limitations. And he always said to me, look, you could go back and be a chiropractor if you want to. But what I have found over the years is that, my niche is different than his. And he's got a huge office and practice in New York, and he's been running it for 45 years.
Yeah.
Would he have loved for me to come there and work with him? Probably, yeah. But that wasn't in my cards. As soon as I left for California for college, I knew I was never going, anywhere further east than Colorado for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
For the most part. Although I went to medical school back on the East Coast, but I wasn't going to stay there. So, but for me, I still collaborate with him all the time. He actually owns a hyperbaric facility in New York and Florida called Hyperbaric Medical Solutions. So I help consult with them. And they have like 7 or 8 offices now, a couple in Florida as well. My brother is actually involved. So that gets me off the hook a little bit.
I was going to say, maybe your brother took the hit for you.
He did. Yeah.
We've used hyperbaric, after surgeries. And we recently have some friends. And obviously, we're always careful about making claims. But I will share a story that we have friends who, 2 in particular, one, we were really seeing close up the journey of he was diagnosed with a certain kind of cancer, colon and lung. And he went to a gentleman, Coach Cal in Southern Cal, on a really strict protocol. But part of that protocol, and I'm talking about every bit of food. And Coach Cal's like, listen, even if you're going to get chemo, we're going to boost you so that you're prepared. And in my one friend's case, he didn't actually need to get chemo. The cells perforated.
It's amazing. Yeah.
But it was this was his full-time job doing just this. But he was talking about coupling the red bed therapy with the hyperbaric treatments.
And methylene blue too, I think, right?
And the methylene blue.
Yeah.
This podcast has been brought to you by Bond Charge. I've been talking about Bond Charge. First, their red light face mask, and they have a sauna blanket that's incredible, heats up in a minute. And if you've been looking to, step up your skincare this year, I know I'm always looking for something, defend, protect, elevate. You can do it with a red light face mask, and Bond Charge has an incredible one. So this mask really works. My skin has been looking good. It boosts collagen production. And it also gives me an opportunity just to kind of take a break throughout the day. I mean, it's cordless, it's comfortable, easy to use, 15 minutes. And if you're so crazy busy, you can actually just put it on your face and do other work. You don't have to make appointments or leave your house or do anything like that. And Bond Charge's red light face mask, it does amazing because it penetrates deep into the skin. So it does boost that collagen production. It can reduce inflammation and ease signs of aging. I'm trying to do all the right things, but this is when I love little extra things I can do to make me just feel like I'm trying to look and feel my best. And if you want to try it, now's the time. My listeners will get 15% off when you order from bondcharge.com. And don't forget to use my exclusive code Gabby, Gabby, at checkout. And the discount applies site-wide. So they have all these other really interesting products. I told you about the sauna blanket. I've got some headphones from there. So if you're curious, head to bondcharge.com. That's BONCHARGE.com. Oh, and also you'll get free shipping and a 12-month warranty. So don't forget the exclusive offer at bondcharge.com. And don't forget the code Gabby, Gabby, at checkout to get your 15% off site-wide. This podcast has been brought to you by Cornbread. So when I learned about the brand, I said, okay, send me the product. I'll use it before I talk about it, see how it goes. Well, I got my CBD gummies. And for me personally, I use this as a tool for either like aches and pains from training, living life. But really for me, it's sleep. And I love that you can have something that is non-addictive, but if you want to either at the end of the day, take a little stress off your day, or like I said, deal with some aches and pains, or give you something to help support, sleep. I like that. It's hard for me to get sleep, and I love using CBD products. So depending on what your use is, cornbread gummies will be incredible. So first off, they only use the best part of the hemp plant, the flower. So you get the purest and most potent CBD. But speaking of potent, it is not addictive and it is legal. You just have to be 21 or older to buy it. And it's formulated really, they think about that. Hey, can we help you relieve discomfort and stress or sleeplessness? All the products, and this is another really important part for me, are third-party lab tested, and they are USDA organic to ensure safety and purity. So for a lot of people, I know they're confused about what is CBD, and how do I get that best in class? Well, this is how you do it. Right now, the Gabby Reece Show listeners will get 30% off their first order. All you have to do is head to cornbreadhemp.com/Gabby and use the code Gabby, Gabby, at checkout to get 30% off your first order. And that's cornbreadhemp.com, cornbreadhemp.com/Gabby. And don't forget to use the code Gabby at checkout. And methylene blue's been on our menu for a couple of years, but this was the moment, I think, for both Laird and I, that we thought, oh, you know what, let's take a little deeper look at this, what this is. And that's why I was so excited to talk with you, because there's something very strange, even in, I would say, both Laird and I, and I'm probably susceptible more than Laird to being like, well, I even feel sort of comfortable that you went through traditional medical practices and you're still also leaning into some of these practices. Yeah. And I don't know where that got into my psyche a long time ago, because I've sort of rebelled against it as a parent, even as a patient. But I can't help but be, I don't want to say excited, but I think the fact that all of you are doctors and involved in the message of the methylene blue, I thought, oh, then maybe we have a chance to really understand it.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't get into it lightly. We knew that when we had the nonprofit organization that it's called Health Optimization Medicine, right? So optimizing your health for most people takes a while. It's not something that happens overnight. It took you 40 or 50 or 60 years to get to where you are.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to feel better tomorrow, but it's not going to happen with slowly, because you have to slowly rebuild the system over time. 6 months, a year, sometimes longer than that when I work with clients in my practice. And so we wanted to find ways we could help people right now while they're on that longer path.
Yeah.
And what we found first, this is with Dr. Ted specifically, was that methylene blue was one of these compounds that was a sleeper kind of compound because it's been around such a long time and it's such under the radar as a result of that because there's no patents associated with it anymore. A pharmaceutical company can't make it into $1 billion drug. And we realized that all this research that had been happening over the last couple decades in mitochondrial performance and energy and detoxification, the ability to carry oxygen as an anti-infective at higher doses. And so we decided to use it we were the first company to come out with a commercial product right before the pandemic in February of 2020.
It's almost like great and brutal timing, right?
It was great and brutal, for sure. No doubt about it.
So how do you and Dr. Ted, after looking at, you have this experience, you're dealing with people's health, trying to rebuild their system, hyperbaric. Yeah. How do you and Dr. Ted sort of come to an agreement? Because this is a lot of people. It's one thing to say, I use this in my practice. It's another thing to say, I'm creating a business around this.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? So you have transcriptions, so many beautiful SKUs. What about this ingredient do you and Dr. Ted go, okay, we're all in?
It was, the cool thing about methylene blue is that there's so much research that's been done because it's been around for such a long time. It was actually created, it's a synthetic ingredient, which is important for people to know. Some people do not like synthetic ingredients, but my argument to that, or my counter to that, is that not everything that's from the nature is actually very helpful for us. You can go foraging the wrong mushrooms and die of liver failure.
Right.
So got to be careful there, right? So not everything synthetic is bad for you. We live in a synthetic world these days with synthetic lighting and air, water, pollution, everything else like that. So it was actually created as a textile dye in the mid 1870s. And it was used to dye blue jeans like yours, blue, actually. But somehow they found that this class of dyes also had this potential anti-infective capacity. And it was first drug that was registered with the FDA back in 1897. And the treatment reason was for malaria because they had no other treatments for it. And it got a cool term associated with it called the magic bullet. It was called the magic bullet because you could give very high doses of methylene blue and you would kill pathogens in a human, but you wouldn't kill the normal cells. And that was kind of the highest echelon for what they were looking for in drugs because, again, if you give something really toxic, you don't want to also kill normal cells. And that's what chemotherapy can do, as we know. But methylene blue had this capacity to do that. So it was really the only major antimicrobial around until the 1950s when penicillin was discovered. And so you had World War II pilots that were going to the Pacific and had to take it prophylactically to prevent fungal infections and in the jungles and things. And they had all these songs that they would sing about methylene blue because I think, as you know, Gabby, methylene blue tends to concentrate in one particular location, which is your urine.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, they all had blue pee. So they were all talking about how they had blue urine, and there was all these songs about blue urine, which is funny.
I was sitting with my friend Elijah, and we kind of share information, and he was saying, okay, you've got to ask Scott. You hear stories like, if it's in your pee, if it's blue, that's actually a good sign, versus if you're taking a product and your pee doesn't turn blue, it's not a good sign.
Usually, we don't know exactly, but we do think that lower doses. If you take a dose of methylene blue and your urine does not turn blue, it typically means you need to take more because your body needs more to create the change in the system that you're looking to get. Yeah.
It's almost like an indication that maybe things aren't working as well.
Right.
Is that right?
You have more stress in the system is what we think.
Yeah.
Because if you have more stress in the system, what happens is that methylene blue converts to a different form, which is colorless actually. So if you're peeing out colorless, you don't see any blue, it's probably because you need more capacity and you need more methylene blue. So one of the things I always tell patients is that if your urine's not blue yet, keep going.
Yeah.
Right? If you feel great though, and urine's not blue, I might keep them where they are, but typically I'll have them at least go until it's blue urine. But even if they have blue urine and they don't feel good yet, I still have them keep going up as well. Because really until the 1950s, the only reason to use methylene blue was as an antimicrobial. And it was at higher doses. It worked really well against urinary tract infections. It's been shown to have effect on viral infections, fungal infections. But after 1950, when the penicillins of the world came around, methylene blue became less used because it had this side effect of turning people's urine blue. At very, very high doses, like over about 3 milligrams per kilogram, which would be the average about 210 milligrams or something of methylene blue, you have other secretions that turn blue as well, including your poop and your tears. Yeah. But
your tears? That's amazing.
I know, right? But again, you're not going to use those high doses very, very often. Right. So as a result of that, it had this different life of methylene blue after the 1950s. It became used in a number of different ways. One way was actually the first antipsychotics were derived from methylene blue. It has this other capacity called being a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which means it blocks the production or the breakdown of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So it increases those neurotransmitters. And so the first antipsychotics were actually derived from methylene blue. And even to this day, there's good studies showing that methylene blue can be helpful in things like depression and bipolar and other mental health disorders because it has that mood raising capacity. Yeah. And most people that'll take it, they'll feel that. They'll feel like they'll have just a little bit of extra, their mood is a little bit brighter, their focus is a little bit brighter. And part of that is because of the neurotransmitters overall. And then from there, people like me learned about methylene blue in chemistry class. Because
you did?
Yeah, because what methylene blue does is it concentrates in the mitochondria in your cells. And so you can look at the mitochondria in a cell with a microscope if you have methylene blue around. And that was the real indication, I think, where something's happening in the mitochondria. Why is it concentrating there? And that's where things got very interesting, especially for us as we were looking at products. So we did a whole bunch of research dives and seeing that methylene blue had this capacity to help with energy production more holistically than any other compound that we could find. Because it did two things. It not only helped you make energy, ATP, but it also helped you detox from the energy that you make. Most people think that you make ATP and then maybe water and carbon dioxide, but they don't realize that, number one, carbon dioxide is not a waste product. Brian, you're welcome. Brian McKenzie always hates when I call carbon dioxide a waste product.
Oh, he does?
He hates it, yeah. I kind of just say it so it gets on his nerves sometimes. But you also make what are called ROS, reactive oxygen species. And that's part of the energy production cycle. However, too much of that can be really stressful for the system. You need some of it to help with signaling and telling the mitochondria what to do. But if you don't have the antioxidant capacity to neutralize the oxidative capacity that you've just created with making more energy, then people aren't going to feel very good. Yeah. And so many people here, unfortunately, are very, very mitochondrial lacking in various ways. Like I think the statistic I saw was 94% of the US population has some element of metabolic dysfunction, which equates to mitochondrial dysfunction.
This podcast has been brought to you by Puri. We have an attitude in our house, and I don't think it's that unusual, that like if you're going to do something every single day, get the best. And not only get something that's going to support you, but definitely don't get anything that is going to be harmful. And that is why I gravitate towards and choose Puri's O3 Ultra Pure Fish Oil, because I know exactly what I'm taking when I get Puri. So their O3 product is not only third-party tested, it's got a high dosage. And that's the other thing. I kind of fall off after a while. If there's too many things to take, something falls by the wayside. So they offer a high dose of 2,000 milligrams long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, and DHA in natural triglyceride form. So that's 80% omega-3 concentration. Like I stated earlier, every batch is third-party tested against more than 200 harmful contaminants, including heavy metals, which I know is a concern, and pesticides. And you can scan the QR code. It's right on the bottle, and you can see the test results for that specific batch. Every test result is published online. So that's that complete transparency that for me is so important. So if you want to do what I did and you can add Puri's O3 to your routine now, they've got incredible offers for you. So there's twofold. So you can either right now get an amazing 20% off your order, or if you choose their already discounted subscription, you'll get almost a third off the price. All you have to do is head to Puri.com, PUORI.com/Gabby, And you can use my promo code Gabby at checkout for that 20% off when you make a one-time purchase. Still such an incredible savings. Or you'll get that almost 1/3 off the price if you are part of the subscription model. Head to Puori.com, Puori.com/Gabby.
And that's a big one.
Yeah, it's so interesting because then you start to realize, even from a simple point of view of these people might be doing a lot of the right things, but they still can't get in front of the 8 ball because of this dysfunction.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, they're going to bed, they're eating, they're trying to move and do all these things, but their body got into such a high metabolic dysfunction that they somehow still can't get the advantage or get the benefits of the new lifestyle changes.
Yeah. The beautiful thing about Methylene Blue is that it can help people that are super sick and can help people that are super optimized that are just looking for that extra edge, because it has this capacity to be kind of like an adaptogen in various ways. Like if you have more issues with energy production, then it can help you there. If you have more issues with detoxification, then it can help you there. And the thing about mitochondrial dysfunction is that it's so prevalent. There's a lot of different reasons for this. Number one is actually insulin resistance. So people that have insulin resistance have more sugar than they need. And then the mitochondria does not like that. And they have these feedback mechanisms that make more stress on the mitochondria as a result of that. Toxins in our environment, everything from our food, water, to our makeup and everything else is causing toxicity to the mitochondria directly. We also have medications that do it. A lot of medications. The most common two that I usually talk about are metformin, which is an anti-diabetic drug that's also thought to be potentially a longevity drug, which I'm not convinced is actually the case, but that's a side note. And then also like proton pump inhibitors, so PPIs, things that people use for reflux and for ulcers and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You also have infections. So infections are a big one. COVID was a big one for many, many people, and causing a mitochondrial dysfunction overall. But mold illness, Lyme, these all affect your mitochondria as well. And so you have all these different factors that the lowest common denominator is your mitochondria. And fun fact, do you know where the most mitochondria are per cell? If you guessed.
I don't know. Your stomach microbiome.
That's a good one actually. But so I was actually talking about human cells.
Oh,
that's
human.
A good one.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Your heart. I don't know.
Heart's a big one. Yeah. So,
Okay.
but the number one place where we have the most mitochondria per cell. So mitochondria are in our cells, right? And that we have some cells that have a higher energy need and capacity versus others that don't have as much of an energy need, right? So the ones that have the highest energy need are actually ovaries and sperm.
That makes sense.
Makes sense. Making a baby
making life
is highly energetic.
Yeah.
Yes. And so sperm and eggs have the highest mitochondria per cell. After that is the brain, the heart, as you said, your liver, and then of course your musculoskeletal tissue. Your musculoskeletal tissue has the most reserve mitochondria so that you can run from the lion if you were being chased. You probably wouldn't survive, but you could try, right?
Yeah.
Back in that time. So when you think about it, symptomatically for how people are feeling, if their mitochondria are dysfunctional, infertility rates, as we know, are just going up through the roof. And then you have brain function, so brain fog, fatigue, concentration, attention, memory, all of those things kind of, are not very good in a lot of people. And cardiac issues, liver issues, and exercise-induced fatigue is big too. So, and the cool thing about Methylene Blue is that you can use these very low doses and you can compensate for any blockage that could be on the chain of proteins that's in your mitochondria that's responsible for making energy. And so you can see this compensation. And also you can see the regeneration of those complexes as well after using it for a period of time.
How do you, let's say one thing you said I think is so important. Laird and I have this philosophy. You start to really notice that if something is good for somebody, whether they're young or old, high performing or maybe more sedentary, the things that are universally true always feel like the things that you can incorporate into your real practice. Because obviously if you're an athlete, you're having this specialized kind of training, but you were talking about the Methylene Blue being able to kind of work in both these ways.
Yeah.
And I find that to be true of food that's good for you, supplements that are good for you, and, first principles on movement, where it's when it's good for everybody.
Right.
And it can fit into how you need it. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah. The change that, what I would say to that is that I absolutely agree. how you take it, how often you take it,
Yep.
the dosing that you take would be different depending on what you're doing, right? And as far as if you're pretty well optimized already, and you have things pretty dialed in, you may not need to take methylene blue every day. It might just be taking maybe a couple days, 3 days a week when you're doing more performance-related tasks where you're going to be under more stress overall. If you have a chronic complex medical illness, then often with these kinds of patients, I have them on daily methylene blue with a titrating dose, increasing it over time until they find a dose that works for them. And then I might keep them on for 4 or 6 weeks, sometimes longer.
Yeah.
And then slowly wean them down over time. But that's what's so beautiful about this particular compound is that not only are you making energy, that's a big part, right? But at the same time, you're helping with the detoxification process because methylene blue can act just like an antioxidant directly. And so the fancy term for that is called a redox cycler, which just basically means it can help donate electrons, which is how your electron transport chain works in the mitochondria. And it also can pick up free electrons, which are the same thing as reactive oxygen species. And then as a result of that, you're not putting any stress on the system by giving methylene blue. And that's a big deal because most things that make energy will also put stress on the system. You can think about like nootropics, for example, nicotine or caffeine. These are nootropics. They work for clocking the mitochondria, increasing the amount of energy that you make, but they're not really working on the detoxification side. Now, coffee is a little bit different, right? Because coffee has its polyphenols and other things that are also working on the antioxidant side. However, there's very few compounds out there that do both, that have the capacity. And that's why you can use it in almost anybody. And I actually, before sometimes I can get them optimized on various supplement protocols, because the deal for me is that as a clinician, I want to not just use methylene blue, obviously. I want to optimize their diet, their lifestyle, their supplementation, look at their labs. We use a test called metabolomics, which is a very holistic and comprehensive look at how the cells are working in Home Hope, in our nonprofit and the training that we do. And so, but using that and optimizing takes a while, as we were discussing earlier. So I can enter with methylene blue at these very low doses and suddenly start feeling a little bit better. Like they can start getting motivated and actually tolerate some of the supplementation that they wouldn't have been able to before. And then on the other end of it, like on the athletes, the people that are already well optimized, a lot of these guys and gals are already under a lot of stress. They're not getting the rest and recovery that they need. And they usually need more support than they realize.
Yeah.
And I find this all the time. And then I combine lots of different things together, of course, right? But including the laboratory testing, other tools and technology, like you have your near infrared light, for example, which combines really well with methylene blue. They activate each other. And so they donate electrons in the same place in the mitochondria. And so you take some methylene blue, you go out in the sunlight, or you go in front of your near infrared panels, and you will feel that energy rise. It's not subtle for most people. And so you can use these in combination, but I'm always thinking about, dosing, titration, and making sure that people have an understanding depending what their goals are. But I know, a lot of athletes, and most of these guys and gals are probably not getting the recovery that they need most of the time.
No, I think people have a misconception because somebody looks fit or they're good at this sort of 1 or 5 skills.
Yeah.
That they're also not really damaging their bodies in other ways. And obviously you learn it as you get older. So I think it would be amazing if you were actively in pursuit and finding the way to, you're never going to balance it out perfectly because I don't think it's natural that we're kind of doing these repetitive motions for hours on end. We're not built for that.
Sure, yeah.
So but at least it can maybe bring some buoyancy to the other side.
Yeah.
That I really appreciate.
I like doing testing as much as I can because it gives you a sense of how balanced people are. I've met many athletes over the years where they're at the top of their game, but I look at their labs, I'm like, how are they at the top of their game still? I mean, it usually means that they're going to go off a cliff.
What does that show up? Because I've even experienced it with, and you work with Brian McKenzie.
Yeah.
We know Patrick McCune, he wrote The Oxygen Advantage, and he talked about, people's Bolt scores and how you see these world-class athletes with these terrible, CO2 intolerances. Like you'd think that they'd be great, but they're not. So I'm curious, for you, like let's say you are looking at a high performance athlete, what are the things you can go, oh great, their body weight, their lean muscle mass, all that's working out. Where do a lot of athletes end up getting in trouble?
The first place is usually their gut overall. The gut is a big problem with high-end athletes because they are using the main fuel of their small intestine, which is an amino acid called glutamine, for muscle growth and trying to maintain their muscle output that they want. But the glutamine itself is being diverted from their gut to the muscle, and as a result, their guts get very leaky. So it's almost always the case that if you have a high-end athlete, that they're going to have a leaky gut. It's very, very, very common. And then what happens when you have a leaky gut is that the gut is supposed to keep things in there and not let them come into in circulation. And when they do things that aren't supposed to come in, they cause inflammation, immune system dysregulation. They can cause depression. They can cause hormone dysregulation, a leaky brain, which is not cool, which it sounds scary, but it's common now. And so you see this in a whole wide variety of people, but very, very common for athletes to have leaky guts overall. And a classic example of this in the more of the acute setting is I had a guy that I was just working with he did the Leadville race, the 100-miler in Colorado where I live. And the year before he finished the race, but he had like just profuse diarrhea. And it's very common for people that are doing long distance work, marathon runners, ultramilers especially, you're going to have issues with diarrhea. So what we did with him is we gave him 32 milligrams of methylene blue every 4 hours, along with our blue carotene, which is a combination of nicotine, caffeine, CBD with methylene blue. And then I gave him glutamine 4 grams every 4 hours. And he finished his time 3 hours earlier than the year before and no diarrhea. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And that's because
that's just sealing up and taking care of the gut?
Yes, exactly. So you just need a more consistent supply of the glutamine to be able to maintain your muscle output, because you're going to be diverting all that glutamine to your muscle instead of to your gut, because that's what you're using, right? So the body has this amazing ability to kind of triage what you need. And well, if you're running for 100 miles, you must be in like really bad trouble, because
you're still going.
You're still going, right? So your gut doesn't matter right now. We need to just make sure that you can.
We'll get it from where we need it.
Yes, and that's what the body does, right?
So great.
And it has this amazing capacity, and that's a challenge in some cases, right? Because stress in general, not only from a 100-mile race, is going to cause the same issues, because you have these hyper responses to things like cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and that's also going to break down your barrier in your gut as well, and also break down your blood-brain barrier in your brain. So you can get as much stress from a 100-mile race as if you were stressed for a month because of work or because of school or whatever it might be.
And I think from athletics, you just think, oh, I'm sore today, I'm stiff today. Oh, this inflammation is part of that thing because I'm doing all this, grinding. And I think you mask stress. You're more stoic. You think, oh, well, this is stressful.
Right.
I'm doing.
Right.
And I don't, it's only been in the last kind of 15 years where I've gone, oh, I still am paying residual prices for not only athletic stress, maybe childhood stress, that you just have to find places to really contend with it. So I know that you're really specific. If I came in and be like, okay, let's look under the hood, the blood work, all this. But in general, I think, I've been really curious about dosage. So you said, hey, if somebody's feeling pretty good and they're optimized, it's a couple times a week, but maybe we could just kind of visit on the methylene blue kind of dosage, because why is it back, by the way? Why has there been this kind of attention and resurgence around it? Yeah. That now we actually have access for real to it, first of all.
So it was the pandemic, really, because when we came out with the blue carotene, which is our Adderall-like one, focus formula, it was really for the biohacker crowd, and because it's a niche kind of product initially, because it does make your mouth blue when you have it up here, as you know. And so we got a lot of visual representation of our product, but we had a lot of people ask about 6 months in if we could make something with just methylene blue in it. And we realized, there were some really great studies, at least in vitro, so not in humans, but looked at methylene blue with coronaviruses in general and saw that it inactivated the coronaviruses. And so we couldn't obviously talk about that during the pandemic, and it wasn't our focus, but because our focus...
You couldn't talk about that during the pandemic?
Can we talk about it now?
We can barely talk about it.
I know. You can even talk about vitamin C or vitamin D being helpful, right?
Or ivermectin or any of that stuff.
It was a crazy time. It was a crazy time. So because of the pandemic, there became a lot more interest in this particular compound. And so I was using it in clinical practice. I wasn't talking about it on any media or anything like that, but we were seeing, fantastic benefits. And then knowing that the dosing really mattered, right? And this is what you were kind of alluding to, is that lower doses of methylene blue, like 4, 8, 16 milligrams, these are really great for mitochondrial optimization. So it helps with that mitochondria to work better. It helps with energy production. It can compensate for any of those the electron transport chain that's not working very well. It can help with the detoxification system. So it's really great for people with with mitochondrial issues specifically. And so what I always do is
the whole world, you mean?
Yeah, 94% of the U.S. population. It's a big group. But with those kinds of individuals where people are really focused on the mitochondria, like those doses can be life-changing. And it was interesting because most of the products out there, even now, are much higher strength than ours. And 1 milligram per kilogram, or about 70 milligrams, is like a common dose for most of these other companies. And now there's like 20 or 30 other companies now. Since we started, we were the only one, so we kind of had the first mover advantage there. But we found that there was a lot of great studies using a lower dose, around 16 milligrams, and especially for neurocognitive performance and in the brain world, as it were. And we're saying to ourselves, well, if it works in the brain at these low doses, why wouldn't it work in other locations? And so we started off at these very low doses and saw just transformative things in people very, very quickly. We would just get story like every couple of days when we first started. And even my own patients that had severe issues with, they had tried everything. And then finally they took some methylene blue, and like 3 days later they were back to work, or their pain was better, or any number of things. Their brain fog was gone. And I was like, well, there's something here for sure. And so we just got more experience with those lower doses and feel very strongly that really below about 25 milligrams of methylene blue is a fantastic mitochondrial enhancer. But you don't want to start at 25 milligrams for most people. You want to start off at 4 or 8 milligrams and titrate your dose every 3 to 5 days until you find your sweet spot overall.
Mm-hmm. And is it, for most people, is it once a day?
Usually it's once a day. I sometimes take it twice a day overall. And some of my patients as well, we do like an 8 o'clock in the morning dose, as well as a 1 o'clock in the afternoon kind of dose. The half-life is about 4 to 6 hours. And so in some of my patients, and in me when I'm traveling especially, I'll take it twice a day because you feel the extra bump as a result of that.
And they say typically men metabolize things like 30% faster than women. Typically, or thereabouts.
The digestion is slower in women overall. Yeah. So they have a slower gastric emptying.
So is that space, is it usually a little wider with some of the female patients, or it's just kind of the same? It's
around, I found to be around the same. I mean, it depends on how you use the product, because we have a troche form, which is this dissolvable lozenge that can be between your upper cheek and gum. The nice thing about that is that being in the upper cheek and gum up here is faster acting. So it takes about 15 to 30 minutes when you start feeling the effect. And it's also not going through digestion. So it's going to be much faster, obviously. And as a result of not going through digestion, most compounds that go through the liver and get digested are inactivated to some degree. I always give the example of NAC. If you take 100 milligrams of NAC, only about 10 milligrams is actually getting into the body because the rest gets detoxified by the liver. But so as a result of that, we created the troches because they're also these squares with a score in the middle. So you can actually titrate them into like a quarter, a half, 3/4, or full, and then you can find your dose over time. And the issue though with methylene blue, as you know, is that if you dissolve it in your mouth is going to turn very, very blue. Yeah. And not everybody wants a blue mouth. I totally understand that. And the good thing is that if it's pure methylene blue, it's 100% bioavailable whether you take it in the mouth or you swallow it. Wow. And so that's nice. It's very uncommon for a compound to have that capacity. Yeah. Like in the other products that we have that are multiple ingredients, it's usually better to go in the mouth because it's going to be, the other ingredients are going to be more bioavailable that way. But so if you want to swallow methylene blue, you can. I would say typically doing it on an empty stomach is better, and then waiting about 15 to 20 minutes to eat afterwards. The caveat to that is that if you have more brain fog, more concentration issues, more brain-related stuff, tends to be better in the mouth because it works faster that way. Yeah. But that does give you a blue mouth, which is not what everybody wants.
So let's say you're sort of leveled out and you're pretty metabolically functioning. Yeah. Is it a couple times a week? Just kind of get that boost, and then maybe what are the special times? Like for me, in my slow, I've been learning slowly about really how to try to use the product. It's before I go out in sunlight, or if I'm going to do a cardiovascular kind of event, things like that. So maybe we could just highlight some places that if you'd kind of optimize taking it.
Yeah. So a big one is going to be endurance overall. If you're doing endurance related work, So methylene blue has this amazing ability to act just like oxygen in your cells. And so oxygen's obviously kind of a big deal. It's something we need to help make energy. It's called the final electron acceptor in the mitochondria. So basically the electrons get combined with the oxygen to make water at the end of it. And so if you don't have enough oxygen around, the system starts breaking down, and this is when you get more anaerobic work, and then typically you have to stop doing your endurance training faster. What methylene blue can do is it can maintain your ability to go further and use aerobic activity as the main way you're using your tissues, because it has this capacity of acting just like oxygen in your cells. And so I have some of my athletes that refuse to not use methylene blue when they're doing endurance training, because they can keep their heart rate up for longer without having to stop or slow down. I have one lady, a patient of mine, that refuses to go on her treadmill in the morning without having it on board, because she can maintain her heart rate at a higher level for longer without having to stop. So from an endurance perspective, it's absolutely something to think about using. And I was talking about the Leadville guy that I work with, the 100-mile race that he was doing. I was giving him a decent amount of methylene blue, 32 milligrams, because that's a huge amount of work that he was doing for a long period of time. Usually the dose for performance is going to be anywhere between like 8 and 16 milligrams pre-workout. And then you can activate it with some sunlight or some near-infrared light. If you're a little bit crazier, like our friend Brian McKenzie, who's done a lot of hypoxic training with it, and he's done... You have a question?
So interesting.
Yeah, I know. He does hypoxic training, takes the methylene blue, and then does endurance work.
Yeah.
And he's found that his VO2 max has gone up by like 10 points when he does it. So it's pretty impressive overall. So you can use it for endurance. Absolutely.
You heard Laird say when he got the green, when you shared that with him, he's always a literal and beyond kind of guy. Like if one is one, two is better, kind of thing. But he did take 50, is that what he said?
Yeah,
right.
50, yeah.
And he went and surfed for 5 hours, but he came back and he's been real sore his hip, and there was a great set of swells over a couple of weeks, but it also hammers him at the same time.
I'm sure.
And so I could tell though that he was excited by the level of energy that he was getting from the methylene blue.
Yeah, he mentioned to me just a minute ago that he just didn't feel as sore. He felt that he had just more energy. He wasn't as wiped out by the end of the day. And what he's doing is very intense. And that's why I recommended a higher dose than the average human overall for his kind of work.
Yeah.
But overall, 8 to 16 milligrams before endurance work is really great for most people. You can increase the dose from there up to 25 or 50 in some cases, like I did with the Leadville guy, or like I recommended to Laird because of his crazy isometric surfing exercise that he's doing. So, but that's one of the main ways is endurance work. Another way is that, all of us are under stress all the time, right? You have a bad day at work, you have a bad day of sleep. It could be a fantastic sleep remedy after if you wake up and you feel like crap, you can take some methylene blue. It can really help you, and it's also going to help, the oxidative stress of not sleeping, is not a good thing, right? So it really help with that. I use it a lot in travel too. So if people are traveling, especially on airplanes. So on an airplane, you're up to about 8,000 feet pressurized. And so you're 8,000 feet above sea level when you're on a plane. And so I live in Colorado, so it's not that bad for me. I'm already at 5,000 feet. So good news, if you move to Colorado, your jet lag gets a lot better. Shocking. That was a nice positive. I mean, my skin is drier and it's cold, very cold. But aside from that, when I fly, it's a lot easier. But I do take methylene blue when I fly too, because when you fly and you're at 8,000 feet, especially if you live at sea level, that's a huge jump. Yeah. And your mitochondria are not very happy with you. And there's also more radiation when you're on a plane. There's also shitty air when you're on a plane. And you have jet fuel and everything else. And so methylene blue can be a way to help protect your cells while you're at altitude. And so as a corollary to that, anybody that comes to visit me in Colorado, I have them on a supply of that when they get off the plane. Yeah. And that's because they're not used to the altitude. And so we have a lot of mountaineers actually that are using methylene blue while they're on mountains and doing, elevations of ridiculous heights, because the methylene blue, again, helps with that redox cycling. It helps with the energy and the detox, and it helps as that final, like just like oxygen if you don't have as much of it around. So those are some special categories. But as I was alluding to earlier as well, and just right now, I mean, most of us are under stress a reasonable amount of time. And so whenever there's going to be more stress on the system, methylene blue can be really helpful in those capacities, even if you're relatively well optimized otherwise.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, having been somebody who's dealt with a lot of physical stress, but also life and work and family stress.
Of course.
I think that that other stress, the everyday living life stress, is harder in a way that it's never as straightforward.
Yeah.
Exercise, it's kind of not personal. It's not that exercise doesn't mean as much, but work stress and family stress has a different kind of meaning, I think, to us. Yeah. And I really think people are managing and trying to process stress, a much more challenging stress than they realize.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's compounding, right? It's coming over time, and all of a sudden you've got 30 years of this thing that you've been doing, and unless you have an outlet like meditation or some kind of self-awareness or just a place to dump it, I don't think people give that enough credit.
They don't, because they think it's normal. Everybody has stress, and everybody feels overwhelmed all the time, and we're not really supposed to feel that way.
No.
We're supposed to have times when we're super stressed, like usually with activity.
Yeah.
And then we have times when we're in parasympathetic mode, right? And that's not an easy thing because our culture is not set up for having an off switch. And when we were looking at various compounds in our armamentarium of things to help people, methylene blue was the number one and number two thing. But the other piece that was missing for a lot of people was their GABA system, their GABAergic system.
I'm so glad you brought this up because I have right here GABA. You guys have some other, you have the sleep, the Z, but you have that's different than the GABA one, right?
So that's all working on the GABA system.
Right.
So the GABA system, so GABA is our main inhibitory neurotransmitter. So our brain's brakes, it's our off switch. And most of us are not minding our off switch at all. And as a result of that, we are getting more stressed, we get more anxious, we get more depressed, and we can't sleep. So another fun fact is that on average, we have about 70,000 thoughts per day.
Yeah.
That's average. And then if you're stressed or if you're anxious, it goes up to 120,000 on average. And so you can imagine, like, that's a lot of thoughts every day. So don't believe everything you think, of course, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. And so, but what is regulating that is the GABA system. GABA, what it does is it kind of breaks the whole system from having that overwhelm. And if you're GABA deficient because you're overstressed, you're overworked, you're undernourished, you have vitamin, mineral, nutrient deficiencies, your gut's not working very well, you are going to get GABA deficient. And that means that you have this imbalance. There's another neurotransmitter called glutamate. And glutamate is our most excitatory neurotransmitter. And GABA is our most inhibitory. And interestingly enough, in the brain, glutamate gets converted into GABA. It needs vitamin B6 and magnesium to do that. And so it's this fine balance between those two. And so if you are too GABA deficient, you're going to have too much glutamate. And then you're going to have more action, more activity, more stress, more tremors, and more just feeling like you're overwhelmed because of that particular neurotransmitter. And a good example of this is if you go to a Chinese restaurant and have MSG in your food. Are you sensitive to MSG?
No, not really.
You're lucky. Yeah. So you have good conversion, right? You have good conversion over from, because MSG is monosodium glutamate.
Yeah.
And so glutamate gets converted into GABA, but if you give a huge load of MSG, it's like a sweetener. And that's why they use it in the restaurants. Yeah. A lot of people, including me, my father and others, will get headaches. They won't sleep very well. They'll feel very irritable as a result of that. It's because of the overactivation of the glutamate system compared to having a low conversion over to the GABA. And
it's funny, sometimes I think when we're on that high on, we think, oh, I'm getting stuff done, I'm alert. I think you're all over the place. I don't think you get to hone in and be focused and get that real kind of productive mental energy.
Yeah.
We've equated I'm vibrating with, I'm alert and I'm getting stuff done. Yeah. When people take GABA though, tell me, I feel like I remember hearing, aren't you supposed to, and I know you have it, you've got products that work on your GABA system, but if someone was going to take it as a supplement, you have to take some other stuff with it, don't you, to kind of benefit?
The thing about GABA is it's too big of a molecule to get across the blood-brain barrier.
Right.
So if it does work for you, if you take GABA, you may have a leaky brain, which means that
you've got way bigger issues than trying to relax.
It's almost diagnostic, actually, in some ways. Like I've talked to many clinicians about this.
Oh, interesting.
If you give GABA supplements to your patients and they work, it means that you have to repair their blood-brain barrier. And that usually means that their gut is leaky, that their GI system needs a lot of TLC. And if you work on the gut and you optimize gut function and you seal up a leaky gut, that's usually going to make the blood-brain barrier less permeable. So overall, if you take GABA, now there might be a couple caveats. If you take like a nanoliposomal GABA, that might work for some people, and that's fine. And also if you take huge amounts of GABA, some of that will get across the blood-brain barrier. But what we decided to do, because we knew that, was that we decided to create things that were enhancing the GABA system, but doing it in a very cool way. It's called obligate pairing is the fancy word for that. But so the GABA receptor has a place where GABA binds. And then it has all these other sites on there where other things can bind. Some of the more serious or more significant things are some of the pharmaceuticals like Ativan or some of the benzodiazepines. So the benzos, what they do is they bind to a site on the GABA receptor separate from where GABA would bind. And they increase the affinity for GABA to bind a significant amount. And as a result of that, GABA binds and you become GABA deficient very quickly. And so the system has to try to compensate for that by decreasing the number of GABA receptors. And this is where there's increase in tolerance. There's risk for withdrawal from dying and from dependence if you stop or you get on these things for long periods of time. Alcohol is the same thing. Alcohol works on the GABA receptor on one of these separate sites and binds the receptor very, very tightly and then depletes GABA very quickly. And then this is when you drink alcohol before you go to bed and you wake up 2 hours later with a pounding headache. Some of that's dehydration, but that's also because you have extra glutamate compared to that GABA. And so you have this terrible headache and irritability because your GABA system was just depleted. And this is why, again, you need more alcohol over time to get the same effect. So you want to be really careful for things that just increase the affinity for GABA to bind without also giving something that's enhancing the GABA system by binding to where GABA would bind on the receptor. And so some of these natural compounds that we use in the products, like kava, for example, which I know you know well, kava works on one of these separate binding sites that increases the affinity for GABA to bind. But in one of our products, we use something called nicotinol GABA or vitamin B3 attached to a GABA. And that vitamin B3 has a transporter that gets across the blood-brain barrier. And as a result, vitamin B3 kind of takes GABA with it as it goes through, and you get GABA in the brain that goes and binds to where GABA would bind. So you don't deplete GABA. And then you also have a little bit of B3, which is mildly activating. And as a result of that, you can take something, it's our Trocom, and it makes you feel relaxed, but you don't feel tired. And you can titrate your dose. We say from the boardroom to the bedroom, Gabby, because you can use it in like during the daytime. People know this feeling, if you're super stressed, your frontal lobe just shuts off. You don't remember what you were thinking. If you can just take down the edge a little bit, that's when you can see your performance get better, right? And it also goes to the bedroom for performance anxiety for guys, right? Because because an erection is parasympathetic, but ejaculation is sympathetic. So if you can stay more parasympathetic for longer, your wives and girlfriends and partners will be happier overall in general. And so we've seen use cases in both sides.
It's so unfair what we ask men, Laird always jokes with me. He's like, yep, I have to always be ready. It's such an it's like we never think, as females, we don't think about that.
Sure.
And it's like when, especially, you have 4 kids, especially if you're in a more complicated family structure, which just means more humans. You're like, right now? It's like, now,
This is the time we have. Everybody's gone. Everybody's sleeping.
Quickly.
Yes.
Are you
ready? Are you ready?
I really learned to really respect and appreciate that.
So we have to relax into it.
No, seriously.
The relaxing is in part. That's
is.
It's the parasympathetic side.
It's a crazy thing.
Yeah. But also of course, if you get too sympathetic too quickly.
Yes.
And then, you finish too quickly.
Then you're a teenage boy.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And so that happens. But, if you're older, you might not be able to recover as fast as you were when you were a teenage boy.
At my time, I'm like, that's your problem. I've moved on. I've got stuff to do.
I know, exactly.
Laird always says, I gave you all my power. I'm like, yep, I got to go. I got stuff to get done.
And he wants to go to bed, right?
Yeah, he's like, what?
That's the nature of it.
I have an inappropriate comment that my friend Don Wildman, who since has passed away in his 80s, he passed, and I overheard him say to Laird at a table, yeah, they respect you a little less every single time they see you naked, and I thought it was just so funny, like that vulnerability moment.
Yeah.
When is it, speaking, your kids are ranged from age 7 to 14.
Yeah.
Is there an age where you go, hey, methylene blue is okay? And are there times where you say, hey, as a physician, I would make an exception if a patient is going through X? Is there? So
what I would say here is that as a company, we don't sell to anybody that's less than 18 years of age.
And even to enter, I think I was going to the site, right? It's 21.
Yeah, because we do have one product that has nicotine in it. So as a result of that. But as a clinician, personally, Methylene blue has been around and used in children for 100 years. So, it has a very good safety record. And so I have a lot of clinicians, including me, that will use it in younger people in small doses just to see if it can help with their metabolic function, with their detoxification, in people that have attention disorders and having issues with staying still in class or just having a hard time with their energy. It's a big issue. And unfortunately, as you know this, like more people are just sicker and sicker, younger and younger, just because of toxicity overall. So there's tons of clinicians that we work with. We have a number of prescriptions providers, people all over the country that are using it in their clinical practice and using it in kids all the time.
I think a kid would love a blue mouth. Let's not kid ourselves.
They do like it. It doesn't taste that good, right? So it's not like candy.
It doesn't taste bad.
It tastes bad, but it doesn't taste like candy. So,
no, but still.
Yeah. So with my kids, what I'll do is I'll have them swallow it with a little bit of applesauce or yogurt or something like that, just to kind of give it a bolus in there so that they can go. And they do like having a blue mouth when I do. So they'll have maybe some blueberries that are frozen, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I used to do that when they were younger, but I do use it on a regular basis in younger kids. I always recommend, if you are thinking about this for your child or somebody that's under the age of 21, that you go to a clinician and work with somebody that can help with the dosing. Again, it's very safe, but in general, I just like somebody to be watched and just surveilled as they're using the products and using methylene blue in general.
Do you use, and again, I know it's very tailored to each person, but are there minerals or supplements that are kind of commonly showing up that we're just either not getting in our food or because we're battling, certain toxins in the air and water?
Yeah.
My approach to all of this too is, like, Laird gets really passionate and he wants to get the bad guy and protect everybody. And I think that's also a role. And for me, I just sort of survey the landscape and go, okay, this is what we're dealing with. How do we deal with it? And once I know, it's not that I don't get emotional about it. It's just that I don't have the emotional bandwidth to get really upset.
Right.
He does. He can be fired up and passionate and still go out and train. I'd have to take a nap.
I understand. Yeah.
And so once I go, okay, this is what we're dealing with. We just have to add these new practices, because people can say, oh, well, it shouldn't be like that. No, it shouldn't, but it is.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah.
Are there minerals or supplements that you on average, you go, most of us sort of need this?
Yeah, there's definitely a number of them. I mean, I think you know this, but most of our food now is significantly vitamin and mineral and nutrient depleted compared to it was 70 or 80 years ago.
Sure.
Up to maybe about 20 or 30% of the actual amount that it was that time frame. So it's a very difficult, especially as we get older, to maintain optimal performance of our cells using just food. And that's hard for people to understand. I hate this. You'll go to one of my conventional doctor friends and say, oh, if you eat a nutrient-rich diet, you don't need to take supplements. It's fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's just obvious to me when I look at people's labs, anything from a high-end performance athlete to somebody that's really sick, or even somebody just in between that's just feeling okay. Like almost everybody is micronutrient deficient, especially in B vitamins, especially in minerals, like your magnesium, your manganese, your other trace minerals, your selenium. Like they're just not getting enough of these. And so the main things that I see are B vitamin deficiencies, antioxidant deficiencies, and I see mineral deficiencies as well. And then also, I mean, there's a lot of other things that I will see, but it's actually very interesting. We were talking about elite athletes earlier, and I mean, across the board, their guts are leaky if they're doing too much, and across the board, they're vitamin, mineral, nutrient deficient. And it's shocking to me, because I see them at the top of their game, and I just know that the other shoe's going to, whatever it is, fall off the foot, or they're going to fall off the cliff at some point. And that they're going to get hard. It's going to be harder for them to recover. They're going to get more injuries. They're going to think this is old age, or this is, I'm aging out of my sport or something like that. But I can give people many more years, usually, if they're optimizing on that cellular side. And then you have all these other things that we can do with methylene blue and using hyperbaric chambers and using other things to help people optimize, right? But from a nutrient perspective, the main things that I see are people's gut needs a lot of work most of the time. And they have these minor vitamin, mineral, and nutrient deficiencies that may not be causing an issue now, but it will in 10 years. Or maybe less than that, depending on the situation. So if you can optimize now, you can optimize their vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and their cofactors, and their lifestyle, and their diet. Like they're going to see a significant improvement in their overall health. And what's hard about that for some people is that if they already feel relatively good, Like they're not realizing that they feel better until they look in the rearview mirror and say, oh, I wasn't as sick this year. I didn't feel like I got so down for the count after I had like a night of pizza or something like that. They have more resilience and they don't get sick as often. And then they'll see that, but women are tending to be better at this than men.
Yeah.
As you know, men are like, I feel fine, right? And women are like, oh, I did feel a difference and I saw this.
Yeah, we love nuance.
Yeah, you're more of a nuance, right? And I work in nuance all the time.
We want to break it down.
Yeah.
No, I think I think also though people get overwhelmed. So we hear about gut health. Is there a test that you do in your office that you go, hey, this gives us a good snapshot. We know nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
But in general, because I think a lot of people don't know where to start.
Yeah, so I was trained in this practice called health optimization medicine, as mentioned, and one of the modules of that training is on the gut itself, the gut immune system. Interestingly, most people don't know this, that about 70% of our immune system is in the gut itself. It makes sense, right? Because we're putting things into our pie hole. Anything that's going in there is not going into the system. It's actually still thought of as the outside environment. And so the immune system evolved initially to protect us from stuff that we were ingesting, single-celled organisms up into us. And so our gut has a huge amount of an immune system function. And it also has nervous function, as we know. So people know that there's lots of nerves, I think, now in the gut. And then the gut's it's communicating with the microbiota that's in there, and the microbiota communicating with the outside layer of the gut. And then there's also tracks to the brain. And then there's all it's all happening together, right? It's all these feedback systems. And then also the gut microbiota that are in there also communicating with our cells. And they have these little vesicles that they can put out to like talk to each other. Mm-hmm. It's called interkingdom crosstalk, where all these different types of microbiota are talking to each other in our gut, and they're talking to our cells as well. So this huge, just beautiful symphony of things that are happening. And so when you're looking to potentially test for what's happening, the main way that I typically do this is a 3-day stool test that's by a company called Genova Diagnostics. And so that's what I was trained in how to use. And so what I like about that test is it gives you sort of a mouth to anus view, which is your whole gut, right? So your gut starts in your mouth, and then it goes, obviously you poop out in the end, right? And so you want to have a test that gives you everything that's happening as you're going through the whole system. So how well are you digesting your foods? Do you have the right gastric acid? Do you have the right protein breakdown products from your pancreas and from your gallbladder that breaks down fat? And so you want to look at all of that. And you want to look at how well your system is working. Do you have a leaky gut? Do you have overgrowth of bacteria? Do you have optimized levels of the good bacteria, as we would say? It's all, of course, nuanced. Good and bad is kind of a hard thing. It's not a black and white, right? And so you're looking at, are there the right types of organisms in there that are making certain products called short chain fatty acids, which are really important for your gut and your gut health. And the main one there is called butyrate overall. And butyrate is the main fuel for our large intestine. And I was mentioning earlier, the main fuel for our small intestine is glutamine. And that's also used for muscle building. And that's why people that are highly stressed and doing lots of activity get leaky guts as well. So looking at that test is a pretty comprehensive one. But I usually pair that with what's called the urine metabolomic test, which is organic acid testing is another name. And organic acid testing is looking for metabolites of various things, including B vitamins and mitochondrial metabolites. So you have all these metabolites that are involved in making energy. And so you can look at all that, but you can also look at signs of what's going on in the gut, looking at digestion, malabsorption, looking at overgrowth of bacteria or yeast as well. So corresponding them is really helpful because, and this is how I was trained to do it, because sometimes you'll see something in the gut that's not in the urine, and sometimes you'll see something in the urine that's not in the gut. So it's hard to catch everything. The gut is very malleable. It's always changing. And so 3 days may not be enough to see what's actually going on. So looking at a urine test associated with that is really helpful, because then you can get a sense of what's happening a little bit more longer term in the system. So the urine's about 6 months, and then the stool is what the stool is. And so it's really hard as a consumer, I think, because there's so many gut tests out there now.
Well, yeah.
And it's so hard to know what is going to be optimal. But you really want to look for one that has kind of your mouth to anus. It's always funny to say. Like that's really like minding, right? So it's not just what kind of gut bacteria you have. It's also what are they doing in there, and also what's happening with digestion as well. So with all of my clients that come in that see me, and the health optimization medicine framework is that you're doing a metabolomic test, looking at those organic acids, looking at vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors, and fatty acids, and heavy metals, and things like that, and also doing a GI test at the same time. So 90% of people that I see need some real significant work on their GI system first, before you can even start thinking about doing any metabolic support. Because if you're giving them stuff and they can't even get into the system, or they're already leaky, or they have inflammation. And a big part of all this is working on their parasympathetic nervous system, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're always stressed, you cannot heal, you cannot detox. The rest, digest, parasympathetic nervous system is just so out of whack for most of us. And so I focus on that a lot, on the GABA system as well. And that's a big part of when I work with patients, is that I really need to focus on optimizing their parasympathetic nervous system so that they can heal. If they are doing the same things that they're doing before, not getting enough sleep, or exercising too much, or not recovering, they're not going to do well. I've known that, and this kind of goes to like the psychosocial emotional stuff too. If people have a lot of trauma, if they have a lot of mental health issues, nothing else is going to work, no matter what supplements I give people. Yeah. Now, sometimes I can still use a little bit of methylene blue in these patients, because it also helps with their mood. It also helps with their energy production. But oftentimes what I tell them is that if you're not working on that psychological piece, there's nothing that I can do that's going to help as much as you want me to help you. And that's hard for people to hear. They're like, oh, I have physical stuff. I'm like, well, what about your PTSD? What about your trauma? I was like, oh, I took care of that. I'm like, did you? Did you really? And some people have, but I know within about 30 seconds to 5 minutes whether I'm going to be able to help somebody, just from a physical perspective. We know that the body can certainly help you shift other things. So sometimes you can start, moving and start getting more exposures to things, and that does help for sure. And you guys do a lot of cold and a lot of sauna, and that can be really helpful for people because it helps change their state. But I found that if you don't work on that psychological piece, it's a big issue. So the nice thing about methylene blue, as you know now, is that it helps with the mood boosting a little bit. It helps with mitochondrial function. So I can start that, and then I can get them enough motivation to say, hey, maybe we need to work on something more psychological, find you somebody to work with on that side overall. And then, of course, work on the parasympathetic nervous system too.
I think it's so interesting because we always try to put everything into silos, even our medical practice, right? It's like it's these things, but this notion of what you're saying and being reminded that it is a whole system. And no matter, even if you have best practices, if you have these things personally and emotionally you're just not contending with, you won't get ahead of it.
Yeah.
And we, with social media and with health and wellness and fitness, we really do try, even though you hear people talking about the holistic, that other side is so quiet and it's not so sexy.
Yeah.
And so it's so funny. It's like, oh, you have to go over there. You have to go take maybe a guided journey to heal this. And then, over here we have our food and movement. And it's like not even seeing that, constantly kind of reevaluating, where am I at? Me, and then also having these other practices, because for me personally, been sort of around all of it. When you're around that much performance, you can really see how broken that is.
For sure.
Because you go, you work out perfect, you eat perfect, your blood work is perfect, sort of, but you have this stuff that you're not dealing with. And my $1 million question is always, what is it also that I know we don't like change, right? Like, I have my shit and I'm going to hold on to it and deal with it. And I know how to kind of compartmentalize and get it done. Besides that, people not wanting to make change. Mm-hmm. You go, even you're going to be better, but you have to make change. People go, oh, I'm okay. I'm not going to do that. Why do you think, is it sort of our cultural teaching? Have we not coveted our well-being? Why we haven't made this is my $1 million question.
Yeah.
Why? What is it that keeps us from saying, this is worth the time and effort to invest in, to try to just be as healthy as possible, not ripped, not, super hot, just healthy.
Yeah. It's a simple answer, actually. These brains were not evolved to live in the life that we live now.
Yeah.
They were not evolved to think more than a couple months or a couple years ahead. We would be dead by the time we were 36, 10,000 years ago. And so we were evolved to survive and to procreate. That is it. Everything else is something that we've had to learn over time. The first people to do this were Tibetan monks and meditation and looking at how the mind is not what we think it is, how we don't have to believe everything that we think. And Eastern philosophy is a big part of my own personal practices and things. And once you start having a better understanding of how the mind works, that we're really just programmed to have as much sex or have as many babies as we can and to survive in the short term. That's it. And we as males were only supposed to be around for about 4 years until the kids were old enough that they would survive, and then we'd find another mate. That was kind of how humans evolved. And this is why men are classically more outside of the marriage as a result of that, because that's their natural evolutionary drive, right? And so it's very simple that we just don't think long-term. It's very difficult for humans to think that way. That's why we always want the magic pill or the magic potion or the magic exercise, 7-minute abs or 12-minute sauna, and that's it, right? That's how we're programmed. And so breaking those programs is not an easy thing to do. Yeah. And so sometimes I hit the hammer on my patients, and sometimes I'm more gentle. It kind of depends on the situation. And I get a sense from them what they need. Some people need to be talked to like they're a little kid and say, do you want to be demented? Do you want to be like your mother? Right? Do you want to see your kids grow up and actually remember what's going on? Right? Because I have some patients that are older that have dementia in the family. They're already having mild cognitive impairment. And I try to be nice for a little while. And then I was actually talking to one of my patients a couple of days ago. She's like, Dr. Scott, can you just be mean to me? I was like, you want me to be mean? Sure, I could do that.
Yeah.
And so that's sometimes you have to do it. Other times it can be more of a cultivation over time. And that's usually what it is. Usually it's having people start feeling a little bit better, because some people, even that are pretty well optimized, don't realize they could feel even better than they do now. And once you can give them that experience, then they're like, I can feel this way. I didn't know I could feel this way. Can I feel this way more of the time? And they go, yeah, you can, but this is going to take some lifestyle stuff. Like, that's what actually another fun thing about Methylene Blue is that I can give a little bit of that, just like you and Laird have tried, and then you're like, oh wait, I can feel a little bit better than you even do already. Yeah. And that's a nice signal for people to go, oh, okay, this is what I can see. And it goes along with the GABA system too, right? If you can start getting people more parasympathetic, sometimes it can be really scary for people to be parasympathetic. They're not used to having no anxiety or stress. And actually you can get this reactive anxiety related to being parasympathetic, being in rest mode.
We're addicted to it.
Oh yeah. And you can, I have a number of patients that happen, like we give them some parasympathetic activation, maybe some breath work, maybe some trocom or something, and they would freak out. I'm like, no, this is your body being relaxed. Feel that, stay there. Yeah. And that's where you need to go. That's where we need to get through.
Yeah.
And usually people can do it, but it's scary for people because they're just not used to it.
Well, and we get addicted to the mania. So you have a full slate. You have 4 children, a wife, practice, business.
Yeah.
What are the things you're personally doing? So let's just assume you're doing all the lifestyle stuff. Okay, well, let's not spend time there. I think the harder practices is that you're dancing always between trying to just be your natural self and a guy who has to live in an unnatural world.
Yeah.
What practices do you have in place that support you that have really been helpful? Because one thing that really comes across quickly about you is, besides intelligence, is a sense of humor. Seems like you're looking at everything like, this is funny, and a curiosity.
Yeah.
How do you support that? Because it seems to come pretty naturally.
It's interesting. It doesn't come naturally to me, but I've always surrounded myself with people that are super fucking curious. And that has always been the way that I've done it. I don't have a natural curiosity like a lot of people, actually. And it's something that I've had to cultivate over time. And the way I've done that is by being around people that are super, super curious. I would say the 5 of my closest friends are the most curious people that I know. And I've even done that since I was in college, and all I wanted to do was study. But I tended to have friends that were like, no, we're going out. We're doing something. I'm like, okay, fine. And so I've always surrounded myself with people that are much smarter than me and have a lot more fun than I do, so that I would, by way of being around them, have more fun too and learn a lot in the process. So it's interesting. My father is very curious as well. But my mom isn't as much. But she's always willing to, do things and be adventurous if she's given the framework to do it. So
Yep.
I'll be very honest with you. That's kind of how I've done things over the years. And so for me, like on a day-to-day basis, one of the main things that I do is really try to take time every day, multiple times a day, micro and macro meditations, I would call them. So micro meditations are just 2 to 3 minutes of just breathing, creating a little bit of space from all those thoughts and resetting. I do that all the time. And then I have longer meditations that I do at least once a day, sometimes twice a day if I have the time. And that's more when more observing my thoughts and I'm observing my emotions and letting things pass. There's one thing that I love to do as well, and I know you have kids, is that I like to practice on my kids. And so every night will usually do something with some of my kids. My 14-year-old won't listen to me anymore, but she did when she was younger.
She's doing her job
a little bit. It's okay.
But it's in there. It's in there.
Oh, totally. I totally know it is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny that she's very much my child too. But so head driven, but trying to give them a little more education that not everything can come from the brain, right? And having more of a
Heart and instinct.
Yeah. And so your kids are always very open to you as their parent. And so it's very fun for me to be able to use some of the lessons that I've learned over the years in various meditations that I do and bring them to them, right? And as a result of that, I get to see them in action and how they affect my kids as well as how they affect me. So I always say that my kids were my first real lesson in the lack of, or the illusion of control overall. Because as soon as you have children, all the control that you thought you had, it is gone.
Yeah.
It is gone. I had my first child, didn't stop crying for 4 months. She was really colicky, and when she was up every 2 hours, and it was a fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
And I realized that I had no control of this thing. And it was kind of a coming to Jesus moment as a Jew. But it was a coming to Jesus moment for me because I realized wow, I don't have as much control as I thought I had. And then that was kind of the first steps on me understanding that you can only go so far as a head-driven individual.
Yeah.
And so many of the practices I work on every day are focused on bringing things back to the body, bringing things back to understanding that everything you think you don't have to get attached to everything you think of. Those hard things that you're thinking of that are worrying you, fear, guilt, shame, these will pass if you let them pass. But if you want to hold on to them, you can do that too. It's up to you. And so my daily practices are usually around meditation and parasympathetic activation. And then the things that I'm learning, the things that I'm doing, I also try to provide to my kids as a way for me to learn. There's a great book that Dr. Ted gave me when I was first learning. It's called Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. Have you heard of this book? It's fantastic.
Yeah.
But there's great little quotes in the book. One of them that I like a lot is that you teach best what you need to learn the most. Yeah. And so I've taken that to heart. So when I'm teaching things to my children, it's the things that I need to learn the most.
Yeah. It's funny. I joke that a lot of times I have people on here who are relationship experts. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you what they're trying to do. They're trying to figure that out. Like you're like, so are you single? Oh, uh-huh. But it's interesting. It's an interesting idea. So you alluded to controls. What's the most valuable lesson to date that you've learned as a parent? Or, it doesn't have to be one, but
that's a tough one.
I'll share mine if it simulates thought.
Yeah, please.
So having daughters, and I would say it's not that I didn't have good parents. I wasn't overly parented, and at some point I didn't live with my parents for several years, and my dad passed when I was 5. And so I would call it parental insecurity. Sure. Because you go, well, I don't want to do what they did, and then you're overdoing it, and then you think, I should be tougher, and it quickly becomes the most important thing you're ever going to do. Mm-hmm. And I finally got to a place when actually met one of my daughters today when she was about 13 or 14. So, 8-10 years ago. And it was this moment of, I'm always hypervigilant, talking about where that's so unproductive. And so and somebody said to me, you're like a hammer, you hammer through, hammer down, discipline. Yeah. But having a family, it's like, okay, now, but we're going to wash the windows. Like you need a new tool. Yeah. You need something else. And the notion when people talk about surrender, I think learning to genuinely say, I'm not going to worry about this. Like even when you put wait till your kids start driving.
Yeah.
Even just putting them in a vehicle with somebody and there they go. It's like, they're not in an accident. Why am I behaving?
Right.
If I'll deal with whatever it is when I get the call.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so my greatest lesson was understanding, to your point, truly, like on a cellular level, okay, I'm not in control. And they have a life and a destiny.
Right.
And I have to accept that.
Yes. And they don't owe us anything. That's the hard part too.
That was easy for me. See, I'm not Jewish.
Yeah, that's
and
not
I
my
always
culture.
tell my kids, you don't owe me anything.
Yeah.
And if you come home when you're an adult, it's because it's good for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
I'm not making you feel guilty about it. Right.
And I always say, you don't get to guilt me because I don't guilt you. I don't play that card.
Right.
And the other kind of important one for me is every relationship, there should be reciprocity in every relationship except one. It's a parent to a child.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't expect that.
There might be some kind of like, hey, while you're in this house, we're going to adhere to sort of some of these playing rules.
For sure, yeah.
But you don't owe me anything.
Yeah, that's a big one. I think that's a big one that I had to learn as an adult too, right? And especially if you have parents that provide for you and that are helpful and want you to go certain directions in life and you decide to go in different ones.
Wink, wink.
Yeah, it could be
Wouldn't it be great?
It could be challenging. But I really love that lesson. I think it kind of goes along with what I was saying earlier, which is the illusion of control.
Yeah.
When you have a crying baby and there's nothing you can do, I wanted to throw out the window. And I can see why parents do that.
Yeah.
Like I had these things in my mind of doing it. I mean, it was crazy. And so, but surrendering to that, just like if you're on a psychedelic experience, you have to surrender to the moment, knowing that no other moment exists. And that's a big one, because nothing in the future has happened yet. Nothing in the past matters. All you have is now. And that's difficult, very difficult, but that's what meditation is. That's what mindfulness practice, what some psychedelics can help people with as well. So I think that's a big one. The other one that I was thinking about as you were talking is that we go to our parent-teacher conferences, and the parents are, the teachers are always like, what are you doing with your kids? Why are they so well-behaved? Why are they so awesome? And we're like, my wife and I looking at each other, we're like, we have no idea. But then I realized what it was. It's just that we're there. That's it. Like, we're not away, we are there. And just having parents that are there and present, that's what most kids need. They don't need life advice all the time. They don't need even my meditation advice at night. They just need somebody to be there. Yeah. And I think that's what it is, because I couldn't figure out anything else. My wife and I are both very nice people, but there's a lot of nice people out there. And I'm not the only nice people out there. The only thing I could really kind of come down to was that we're just there. Yeah. And we're very present as much as we can. I'm not always as present as I would like to be. My wife is very good at that, actually. But just being there. Yeah. And I think that's our presence, our energy, our care, and as you said, the non-reciprocal needs or the relationship is really important. And that's how I see it. I don't see that my kids owe me anything other than, like you said, they have to follow some rules when they're in the house.
Sure.
And those things as well. But I think that's the other one that I would say is just being there. Yeah. And that doesn't have to mean a lot.
It's a really important thing. I remember my youngest daughter, who's kind of the more instigating, and she asked me one time when she was like probably 9 or 10, oh, well, are now you happy because she did something? And I go, your behavior, my happiness is not reliant upon what you're doing. I love you and I want you to be safe and healthy and good, but I'm not going to be happy now that you put your stuff away. Right. We have an older daughter, and I was fretting one day, probably outside by a garbage can, and privately, and I talked to Laird, and he said exactly what you said. He goes, "Listen, you're there and you love them."
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, thank you for that. What about as a husband? What have you learned? I know you have a very smart wife. She's a doctor.
She is.
You met in medical school. What has shown up for you? Because I think we go into these situations with one framework, and then hopefully we learn.
Yes, we got married young. I was only 30. I mean, I don't know how young that is compared to, but we had started having kids when I was 30 years old. Yeah. Got married when I was 29. So we didn't know a lot about anything, and we've evolved a lot over that time. But I think the main thing for us that it really works well is that we really do care for each other, but we also care for our own independence as well. So she's not reliant on me. She is like militantly unreliant at me. She does not want to be reliant on me. And that's how she grew up. She always was told that she needs to be able to do everything herself. And that's what she's instituting in the kids too. And so for me, I love the independence as well, being able to have my own time and my own projects and being independent in that capacity. So alone, but not alone, it would be more together, but having space within that and enjoying each other's company and really complementing each other really well. And she has certain things that she's really good at. I have certain things that I'm really good at. We also sometimes call it a challenge for our kids because she's type A about certain things and I'm type A about other things. And so combined with like a massive type
spectrum.
A person. So there's no type B or anything around
right.
it. So I'm type A about food and about sleep and about water and hydration and structure, and she's really type A about organization and cleaning.
So there's hammered everywhere.
Yeah, so they're hammered on both sides. So, but our house is very clean.
Yeah.
And our kids are pretty good about it. They're kids, of course.
They come around.
Yeah. So I think marriage it's really a partnership in general.
Yeah.
Do you work well together? Do you have the same basic values? And we do. If anything happens, like we're there for people to help them, our friends, our family, there's no questions, right? And she has the same kind of values that I do. So I think that's really what's worked over the years.
So really quickly, I'd like to slide over to the hyperbaric because I think people, it's so interesting to me that they're very skeptical or they don't give it the power that it is or can be as a tool that's available. For example, if you've had a head injury or wounds or, and all these other modalities, maybe you could just share the ways that you have been using it so people can get a real understanding on what an incredible tool it really is.
Yeah. So I think that the first overview of it is to understand what's happening in a chamber. Mm-hmm. In a chamber, we're basically getting a lot more oxygen in circulation. We're doing that by combining increased oxygen that you breathe with increased atmospheric pressure. And we've been talking about oxygen already. Oxygen is very important. We typically carry oxygen on red blood cells, which is what carries it through the rest of the body and to our tissues and drops it off and helps us make energy. So we're relegated to how many red blood cells we have in circulation as to how much oxygen that we can carry. And so the only ways to increase the amount of oxygen carry capacity are to come to Colorado, hang out with me for about 90 days, and you'll get more red blood cells because you secrete a hormone called epogen, or EPO for short. Mm-hmm. This is also a drug that cyclists and others will use because it increases their oxygen carrying capacity. And so methylene blue does this as well, as we talked about. But in general, the only way to increase the amount of oxygen you can carry is by increasing the number of red blood cells in circulation, unless you have a hyperbaric chamber, because that increased atmospheric pressure simulates the pressure you would feel under a certain amount of seawater. And as a result of that pressure, we all know that water is very heavy. You don't feel it when you're under the water, but water is extremely heavy. So that heaviness drives oxygen not only onto the red blood cells, but also into the liquid of the bloodstream itself, which has very little oxygen in it at sea level. But we can get up to about 1,200% or more oxygen in circulation. And as a result of all that oxygen coming in circulation, then you have these catalytic changes that happen in the body as a result of it. You have a reversal of low oxygen states. Mm-hmm. You have the creation of new blood vessels. You have stem cells released, which are baby cells in our body that get released from places like the bone marrow and the brain that can go to areas that need new cells to help recover. New bone, new neurons, new heart, new cartilage, these things like that. Also, it revs up your immune system function. So it helps get things to areas that have damage to help clean them up. It also prevents scarring in tissue because you can help rebuild that system faster. It also helps with infection. So if you have a high oxygen load that in bugs that do not like high oxygen, it's going to kill those bugs. And that's how I first learned about hyperbaric therapy in medical school. And then that high oxygen load is also going to cause stress on the system if needed, and then it can cause killing those bugs in that way as well. And it also improves flow. It improves blood flow and lymphatic flow as well because of the pressure in a chamber. And it decreases inflammation. It decreases inflammation and swelling initially, and then over a longer period of time, it actually can downregulate some of the inflammatory mediators that are responsible for chronic inflammatory things. And so that's a lot of things it can do. Most physical issues, mental issues are related to one of those things. The key to understand, though, is that if you have an acute injury, acute stress, acute trauma, low oxygen state, acute infection, hyperbaric therapy can immediately be helpful in these patients because it can help rebuild the tissue very quickly. and regenerate the tissue and accelerate the healing process. This is also the same thing for muscle recovery and like from an exercise endurance and athletes and jet lag. You can see very quick responses to the tissue because all you really need to do in those cases is just oxygenate the tissue, honestly. And then you can see the improvements as a result of that. However, if you have more of a chronic issue, chronic medical illness, say you have mild cognitive impairment, you have a dementia, you have a chronic pain, an infection that's been going on a long time, concussive symptoms that have been ongoing for long periods of time, a stroke. The issue is that, and this is how I got into methylene blue and to everything else, is that you need the machinery for your cells to work appropriately to be able to harness all that oxygen. If you give the system a whole lot of oxygen without supporting the system, you're just going to create a lot of stress in the system. And if you don't have enough antioxidants to neutralize that stress, you're going to feel terrible going in the chamber. And so I've gotten in trouble in my community, in the hyperbaric community, because I recommend to not go into the chamber for 3 to 6 months if you have a chronic issue and you haven't been optimizing ahead of time. If it's an acute issue, do not pass go. I mean, maybe go to the hospital if you need to. But other than that, hyperbaric therapy is fantastically effective at healing. But if you have a long-term thing, I got burned in the beginning of my hyperbaric practice because I didn't realize that this was the case. And so, but when I started supporting mitochondrial function, energy metabolism, detoxification, I waited 3 months or 6 months. I started some methylene blue on these patients. It was like a transformative process. Not only did they do better during their hyperbaric protocol, but they also did better after. And that's the important thing. I found people that were really sick that went into the chamber, they'd feel like shit, usually. Sometimes they'd feel a little bit better. Oftentimes they would feel better by the end of it, but they would always relapse or always their symptoms would come back over time. And I was wondering to myself initially, why was this the case? And I realized it's just because they didn't have the machinery, the mechanisms in place to make energy and detox from the energy effectively. So this is kind of all comes full circle for me, right? And because this is when I realized I really needed to support that part of what was happening. And that's when I met Dr. Ted and got involved in the health optimization medicine nonprofit and learned it myself. And then when we started making products, the methylene blue became something that I started using almost immediately in people that needed that support so that I knew that they had mitochondrial support while they were getting into a chamber. And I use the chamber for a lot of different things, for performance, for recovery, for significant medical issues, as I was alluding to. And a lot of it just depends on the acuity.
Yeah. I love that. And I just love that it is there available. And as long as people understand, there's so many ways. Like we went to this one place that's probably does something similar to you where he's like, listen, if you have a concussion, you have a very different protocol inside the hyperbaric than if you have a wound.
For sure.
And so it's not, hey, one
pressures.
size fits all. Yeah. It's like you really need to be around and know somebody. So do you give we've talked about the light with the methylene blue, but are they also for certain patients taking it prior to going into the hyperbaric?
Yeah,
or is that
absolutely.
a separate?
No, it all gets integrated for me. I mean, the way I really practice is in an integrative way. So I'm always thinking about laboratory testing that can be helpful, dietary changes that can be helpful, technologies that might be helpful, like lights or like saunas or cold or whatever it might be. What are their personal practices are they doing? Are they getting out in the sunlight? Are they seeing the sunrise in the morning? And like, are we optimizing their sleep? Of course, right? That's personal practices.
Right.
And then I'm also thinking about how you can surveil people as they're going through and make these hyperbaric protocols more dynamic. And that becomes, again, a challenge for the hyperbaric community. Everybody wants to treat everybody the same way. But as you were alluding to, there are different pressures for different issues. If there's more neurocognitive kinds of things, you typically don't go as deep in the chamber as if you have a wound or something that's more systemic that requires healing. The brain is more sensitive to oxygen and pressure. And as a result of that, if you give too much oxygen and pressure, you might actually cause more stress on the brain than you want to. So for me, when I'm thinking about a common thing that I do, a common protocol would be, let's say somebody had a concussion, for example. And a common protocol would be, if it's a chronic concussion, has been around 3 or 6 months or longer, then I would try to get them as optimized as I can with their vitamins, minerals, nutrients, their gut, their hormones sometimes, although hormones not as much, because once you heal the brain, typically the hormones get better as well. I have arguments with my friends in the hormone community about this, but because I think hormones can be very helpful too. And so it's sort of a chicken before the egg, which one do you do first? But in this case, like somebody with a concussion. So I'm doing laboratory testing if I can. And then I'm thinking, what dietary changes can we make? And typically with concussion, any brain injury, it's going to be more on the low carb side, on the higher fat side, because the brain does better ketones, on fat burning products. And so that's typically what I'll do. And then sometimes I'll give some additional ketones in addition to that.
You mean like exogenous ketones?
Yeah, exogenous, like ketone esters, yeah.
Okay, I'm so happy you're bringing this up because, Laird is so opposed. Like, I've even asked Laird to even consider getting on hormones.
Okay.
And he is like, I think you could figure the way to do it, figure it out through your food, whatever. But we talk about exogenous ketones. I like them.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just curious. He's like, does that have any benefit the same as when we get it from our food?
So being in nutritional ketosis, being in a nutritional state is optimal overall.
Right.
However,
of course,
but it's not easy for people to stay in there.
Right.
And so using ketone esters specifically, so the salts are okay, but the esters are more protective in general. They taste a lot worse. I've never tasted rocket fuel, but that's what they probably feel.
Well, the
like
original formula is like if you had VMN or the original before it became Ketone IQ, the original.
Yeah, so bad.
I had it in my fridge, and I'm not kidding. I'd open the fridge and I'd look at it and I'd think, yeah, not today. I can't do it.
Yeah, I know. It's tough.
So you really prefer the esters over the...
I prefer the esters over the salts because they also have more brain protection.
Great.
The esters have been more studied to prevent things like oxygen toxicity, which is something that can happen in a chamber if you're using it deep for a long period of time. And that's because there's too much oxygen in the system, and that can cause the brain to get upset and can cause a seizure, which is rare, but it does happen. So Dominic D'Agostino, who's a friend and colleague, he did studies on Navy SEALs, and they all went to 3 atmospheres of pressure on 100% oxygen. And usually you have a seizure within about 15 minutes or so at that pressure. Okay. That's 66 feet of seawater for people.
Yeah.
And so what they do is they give people hypothetically air breaks, so they wouldn't be breathing 100% oxygen the whole time. But if you're a Navy SEAL, you can't have any bubbles. It has to be recirculated. And so what they would do is they gave ketone esters, and their time to seizure tripled.
Wow.
And so they were able to stay at that length. So these guys were not in ketosis. These were Navy SEALs. And so they would just give them the ketone esters, the exogenous ketone. So, and a lot of the people that I work with, we're looking at, especially if they have a lot of oxidative stress already, is a great way to protect the brain at the same time as giving extra oxygen is to give ketone esters ahead of time. And so that's one thing I use a lot in concussion patients. I also use a lot of the methylene blue. And so it's often 30 minutes before hyperbaric therapy, or maybe 45 minutes, depending, some methylene blue, a ketone ester, then get in front of the near-infrared light, because the near-infrared light is going to activate the methylene blue. It's also going to activate the mitochondria itself. And so wherever you're shining the light, that's where more blood flow is going to go. That's the other thing people have to remember is something I think about all the time, is that when you're in a chamber, you want the oxygen to go where you want it to go. And so that's why you don't want to eat right before you go into a chamber, for example, because if you just eat, all your blood flow is going to your belly. And so if you're shining the light, making sure you're shining your head. And there's also the little devices you can get for your head from a number of different companies.
And you have to be close. Like I keep hearing 3/4 of an inch.
Very close.
And after that, it's like almost a no-go. Is there, and I know there's, and also if you film it in slow motion and it flickers, is it not good? Like you hear all these things about the red light. Is there a brand that you personally like?
I mean, there's a couple on the market that I think are better. I mean, you want to do one with less flicker in general.
Right.
You want to do one that's pretty well tested for their light and their output. The challenge is that almost all of them are coming from China, and almost all the companies are getting their lights from the same location. And so it's not like if you get one company, it's going to be a whole lot different than the other.
Right.
I find I have a hyperbaric company that also has lights, and we source them, and so I feel comfortable with what we source because I look at all the specs ahead of time, and so that's where I get mine from. My company, it's called One Base Health, and so. But there's a lot of other companies out there. I think when you look, there's a couple of guys out there. There's a guy from New Zealand, I forget his name, but he did a really good expose on all the different light companies and all their specs. So I would have people just check out what they like and all the specs and what they're looking for. But the near infrared light, like around 810 nanometers, that does penetrate a little bit better than the 660. So like the actual red light itself, and you get on a panel, that you need to be super close to overall.
Yeah.
And the near infrared, that's a little bit higher wavelength. You can be a little bit further away because it does get more penetration, but you do have a skull, and there's that. And so if you do have, so I have a practitioner, a friend of mine, what she does is that she does neurofeedback with the lights on at the same time, like in a helmet. She activates it with methylene blue. And then she puts them in a hyperbaric chamber.
I like
and
it.
that's transformative for so many people. So that's a common combination that I'll use.
You're really, you must be having fun being in this cutting edge in these two areas in the hyperbaric, because you were there before people are finally getting there.
Yeah.
And then now with Dr. Ted with the methylene blue. So in wrapping up, maybe we can just remind people, because you have a lot of SKUs. It's funny, I typically, usually I have people, maybe they're involved with the company, but because what you're doing is so specific and very thoughtful, in transcriptions, I really think it's maybe we could just talk about the SKUs and the thinking behind it. It sounds like Dr. Ted is a unicorn.
He is. He's definitely one of those people that you don't meet twice in a lifetime kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when your IQ is over 180, I think it's 1 in a billion or something like that, his IQ. So it's not something you find very
And you
often.
say he has a high EQ, which those things usually don't live together.
They do not. No, it's a very uncommon combination. But he's had to work on his EQ for many years. But it was not how he started. It was
That makes
IQ.
Me feel a little better.
Yeah, he's got 5 different boards, and he's been in currency trading and lots of different crazy things over the years. So what the transcriptions company really birthed out of was our nonprofit. Our nonprofit is a nonprofit. We have a training program. We all donate our time. We've all helped create the education, the material. We have practitioners, licensed and non-licensed, that come in and get trained with us. We have cohort style as well for one of our modules, our primary one called Metabolomics. And so we have a small group of 10 or 20 students every 3 times a year or so for 12 weeks. And every week you get a lesson from one of the faculty, from me, Dr. Ted, one of the other faculty at the staff, in our staff. And so the nonprofit is where it's our base. We all donate our time to that. But transcriptions developed because, and I think I alluded to this earlier, we all need help right now while we're on the longer path to optimizing our health. There's lots of roadblocks. There's lots of barriers. There's lots of things that get in the way. And so what are the main things that get in the way? Energy, focus, anxiety, sleep, immune system function. And so we've created products or SKUs that have addressed all of those things. So the first one we came out with was something called Blue Ketone. And that is our focused formula. It's productivity. It's just feeling like you're on in the flow for about 3 to 5 hours. And it contains methylene blue, caffeine, about a quarter cup of coffee, nicotine, just 1 milligram, and methylene blue. Did I say methylene blue already? CBD. CBD is the last one. So methylene blue, caffeine, nicotine, and CBD. Just a small amount of CBD. And the reason for that is we wanted to give a holistic formula that was also not only just clocking your brain with nicotine and caffeine, but also protecting your brain. That's how we think of formulating in general. We're not there to just give you an instant bang, which you get with this product, but you don't get the come down or crash because you have more of a supportive nature to having the CBD and the methylene blue in there at the same time as very low dose nicotine and caffeine.
Can we de-villainize nicotine once and for all, please?
It's a difficult one to de-villainize because it's been around such a long time.
Well, I always joke, I never have drank alcohol in my adult life. I grew up in the generation where the adults in my life were smokers. So I didn't smoke.
Yeah.
I'm not for nicotine, but it's so interesting between mushrooms, microdosing for me, and nicotine. It literally took until my late 40s and 50s to have a new understanding and relationship with these things because I didn't pay attention enough to learn otherwise. So nicotine, in itself is really cognitive, supportive, and protective, is it not?
It is very much so. And the challenge with nicotine is that it is addictive, especially if you vape it or smoke it, because those products also have other additives in them that make them more addictive. And an instant hit of nicotine is just not a good idea because it is addictive. So if you don't smoke it or vape it and you take a dose of less than 4 milligrams per day, the risk of getting addicted to it is super fucking low overall. And it has all these amazing qualities. And you just alluded to them. Really, it has great evidence of being a significant cognitive enhancer. It improves memory, recall, verbal fluidity, and otherwise cognitive function. And so it's been studied in mild cognitive impairment. It's been used in COVID now. A lot of our integrative docs are using it in patches because not only does it do that, it's also an anti-inflammatory. And so we saw amazing things when we first started using the products, people getting their smell back, for example, just with a little bit of blue cannatine. And I can only hang my hat that maybe methylene blue was helping there, but I think it was mostly the nicotine.
Well, isn't the spike protein, doesn't the nicotine kind of sit on that receptor better than the COVID, right? The spike protein
in the lungs.
Wasn't that, isn't even, I mean, what is it? There's sugar and all kinds of toxins in cigarettes, but a lot of smokers were not getting.
They didn't get as sick as we thought they would be, because we thought that because it was a respiratory virus that the smokers would get it the worst, but they didn't.
Yeah, and the nicotine probably.
Yeah, the nicotine was protective in the lungs, interestingly enough, but you had to smoke it somehow. That's the only way it was protective. You took a pill or a patch.
I see. It
wasn't protective in that way. So, but that's very interesting, right? So it was so nicotine has these protective qualities, and we villainize it because it's in cigarettes and it's in vaping products. And look, in a cigarette, you have 26 milligrams of nicotine per cigarette. And our product, we use 1 milligram overall. And it's in a full troche, and most people will take a half as their dose. And so it's a half a milligram of nicotine, and it's slow release over 15 to 30 minutes. So you're not getting an instant hit of nicotine. You do feel the nicotine pretty quickly, but it's not an instant thing. And so that's a really big thing about nicotine overall, is that low doses, less than 4 milligrams per day, especially if you're using it in more of a comprehensive formula like we are. Not only is nicotine increasing energy production and all the things that it does, but we're also giving the methylene blue and the CBD in there so that it's protecting your brain as well.
Yeah. So you have the blue formula, which is
the pure methylene blue. Yeah. That's called Just Blue. And we have two different strengths. We have Just Blue at 16 milligrams, and we have our Tro Plus Blue, which is our practitioner only. And that is 50.
Yeah.
What we didn't talk about earlier is
the layered dosage.
Yeah, the layered dosage. Typically, that is for significant stress on the system.
Sure.
The higher doses are also great for infection. And so there's great data that over about 1 milligram per kilogram is fantastic for infection overall. And so I use this in clinical practice in people up to about 2 milligrams per kilogram, which would be about 150 milligrams or so for acute viral, for acute bacterial infections. I mean, oftentimes it's in combination with a lot of other things, of course, but I've used it very successfully in people in these higher doses that have more stress on the system, like Laird or other people that are doing lots of endurance work, like the Leadville guy I mentioned, using 32 milligrams every 4 hours, that kind of thing. But the 50s there's more risk to take it over the long term, because the body does need to create its own compensatory mechanisms by having the higher doses, which basically means it needs to produce its own antioxidants to help compensate for it. And if you're already antioxidant depleted, you're not going to do well with higher doses over a long period of time. And so almost always with me, unless it's an acute thing, just like there's hyperbaric acute things too, I'm always titrating the dose, always titrating them from lower dose, 4, 8, 16 milligrams, and then going up if they need to. But starting off at lower is much better tolerated overall. And a big thing with methylene blue as well is quality as well. We didn't talk about that, but
we've been talking about now that there's so many players on the market that sometimes you're not even really getting. It's not tested for metals or things like that. Yeah,
especially the liquids we found, the potency is never what the label claims. And I think it's because the potency in the liquid deteriorates over time, especially when it's actually, if you get sunlight and other exposures to it. And so almost all the ones that we tested did not meet label claim. They were like 60 or 80% of label claim, which is much less than you'd anticipate.
Yeah.
It's also harder to dose.
And you're always, no matter what, you never get the chance to do it sublingually. You always have to drink it.
You always have to drink it. And it's much easier to get blue all over the place with liquid.
Yeah, of course.
In general, it's harder to travel with.
Yeah.
In my house, we always have buffered vitamin C around.
Yeah.
That's the antidote, actually. So if you have buffered vitamin C in the house and you get it on tabletops or something like that, you can scrub it with vitamin C very quickly and it will go away. I think it saved my marriage a couple times. I had something in the sink and it's all blue and my wife's like, what the fuck? I'm like,
one of my daughters loves chlorophyll too. So between turmeric in our house, Laird juices turmeric, chlorophyll, and methylene blue, now we have it all
quite
going.
The colors.
And ready. So there's the sleeping, we talked in the blue and the canteen, and then canatine. Is there anything other or new that is important?
So on the GABA side, we have two products. We have our Tro-Z for sleep, and we have our Tro-Calm for relaxation, anxiety reduction, can be taken during the day. It doesn't make you feel tired from the boardroom to the bedroom thing, as I talked about earlier. And so that's really leveraging the GABA system overall and parasympathetic activation, and extremely important for us to heal, as we talked about using those. And the other product that we have is called our Trommune. And that's our high strength, high potency extract of the cordyceps mushroom. Cordyceps is a really cool mushroom. It takes over arthropods and makes them into mushroom containing factories. Basically, it's like zombie mushrooms. That's what they call about. It got a lot of press recently because of a show on HBO called The Last of Us, which is a show about the cordyceps mushroom infecting humans and making them into zombies. And then they turn into mushrooms afterwards. But that doesn't happen, obviously. This particular mushroom only infects very small arthropods. But it's been prized for thousands of years in China for its medicinal qualities. The most active ingredient in there is cordycepin from the mushroom. It's about 100 times more potent as a anti-inflammatory, as an immune system modulator, as an antiviral. It's being studied in cancer and asthma and allergies because it has this amazing effect on the immune system, basically decreasing inflammation and fighting viral infections and maybe cancer too. And so we took this particular compound and we made it a high potency immune system activator. So
this one I got really excited because I knew about the other ones. I didn't know about that till today.
Yeah. It's actually, it's my second favorite after the Just Blue overall.
Do you ever use it as a prophylactic? Like, hey,
Always.
I'm just going to travel and I just make sure kind of thing?
I do it. I mean, I take it almost all the time because I have 4 children, as you know. Yeah. So there's always somebody.
Somebody's coming in
always
with something.
Somebody with something, yeah.
Is there ever a time it's like, hey, methylene blue, it's off the table. Do not take it. You have this thing. It's a no-go.
That's a good question. Yeah. So if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you shouldn't take methylene blue.
Okay.
There's some studies that say that it may be harmful. Just don't take it if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. Unfortunately, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you don't know what to take anyway. It's very difficult.
You know, on prenatal vitamins, it says check with your doctor before taking in case you're pregnant.
Yeah, I know.
Have you ever read them?
No, I'm not surprised though.
No, it says that on the prenatal vitamin.
That's hysterical.
It does, for real.
It's hysterical. So it's very difficult to give anything to pregnant women and to breastfeeding women in general. So that's one category.
Okay.
The other people that have to be mindful is if they have high blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, that's difficult to treat, difficult to stay in range. Methylene blue, because it does increase some of those neurotransmitters, can increase blood pressure. So you have to be careful when you start it. I would always recommend following with a healthcare provider if you are. The other main category that always gets worried and that's important is patients or people that are on SSRIs or SNRIs, like some of these newer antidepressants, because those antidepressants decrease the amount of serotonin that gets reuptaked. And as a result of that, you have more serotonin around. And then methylene blue also is going to increase serotonin as well. So the risk, though, is extremely low if you're using very low doses of methylene blue and you're taking your SSRIs. But if you are taking SSRIs, I do recommend, again, working with a healthcare provider. I have some integrative psychiatrists that have been able to wean their patients off of SSRIs and get them on.
What's all the studies anyway saying that? Does it really work?
Right. I mean, we know that depression is not a serotonin deficiency.
What was my favorite? Theo Vaughn was doing an interview, and I think it was with, I don't know who it was with, maybe RFK it was actually Tony Robbins, of all people, talking about, they've got all these studies saying it doesn't even work.
Yeah.
And you could see Theo Vaughn being like, what? I've been on this for 25 years.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, look, in some people, it can absolutely be helpful. And I totally understand that. The challenge, though, is that they don't work right away. They work in 4 or 6 weeks if you're lucky. And also, there is a black box warning on these drugs, too, with suicidality. In fact, I know the lady who got that black box warning on the label because her sister committed suicide in the 1990s on one of the drugs. And so very, very sad overall. But as I was alluding to earlier, it's the GABA system that's really, really involved in depression and anxiety. And if you can optimize the GABA system, there's a new drug that just came out for postpartum depression that works on the GABA system. And it works immediately overall. Now, their recommendation is to take an SSRI while you're taking the GABA so that you have time for the SSRI to work. And you come off
kick
the GABA.
in?
Yeah, but I mean...
So take these 2 things, the one that'll get you until the other one kicks in, but then get rid of the one that's
actually working. Yeah. So we know the GABA system is very important in depression, and the serotonin deficiency aspect, what we always thought, does not exist in depression overall. So that's a big thing for people to realize. So when you're taking methylene blue, as I was alluding to, like I've had integrative psychiatrists that have been able to wean their patients off the SSRIs and use methylene blue instead. Now, I wouldn't ever recommend somebody do that on their own. Always with somebody, it can be very difficult to come off some of these antidepressants because if you've been on them for a long time, the challenge of weaning them off can be big. It can be really hard. And it takes a very slow wean for most people to be able to do that effectively.
Do you know that they don't even have sometimes a system in place to wean them off?
I know. Yeah.
And
you have to get it compounded. Yeah.
And then they're like, you're breaking pills in half and it's like this whole thing. So I really, it's so interesting. It's like, no, you have it. It's like, great. I don't want to be on it now. Oh, all right. Well, we've got to put that together.
Yeah. So I have my colleagues that do this mostly work with compounding pharmacies.
Yeah.
So a compounding pharmacist can make the actual milligram dosage that you need of anything that you need.
Because it can take a year. You can be tortured for a year when you get off these things.
Yeah, and coming off of Xanax and Valium and the Ativans of the world, like those are really difficult too. You have to come a very slow wean and then support the GABA system as you're doing it. So those are the main, for methylene blue as far as contraindications, those are the main ones. The other thing that I always just recommend for people to know is that there can be detox kinds of symptoms as you're doing it. It's an adaptogen in a lot of ways, so it tends to work on whatever you need. But if you especially go with that too high of a dose too quickly, you can get headaches, you can get irritability. Sometimes you can get GI symptoms, you can get muscle pains and aches and things like that come with detox overall. So higher doses of methylene blue that are over 1 milligram per kilogram, but especially over 3 milligrams, those can be more dangerous overall. And then you need to be working with somebody closer if you're going to do that, because it can affect your gut microbiome over time. It can also potentially have more of a risk if you're taking SSRIs, or if you have a specific type of anemia or a deficiency in your red blood cells called G6PD deficiency, which is an inherited disease that doesn't usually cause issues, except if you have significant stress on the system. So higher doses of methylene blue, they can cause more stress on the system and potentially cause those red blood cells to break. But that's only been shown with IV methylene blue overall. Okay. And the risk with the serotonin thing is something called serotonin syndrome, which has only been described with IV use of methylene blue as well. So I don't recommend IV in most cases. I think most of the time, because methylene blue
You think it's too strong?
I don't think it's required, because methylene blue orally is just about the same amount of bioavailability.
Got it.
In some people with acute infection or acute trauma,
where you're trying to just get in
as fast as you can, then I think that's a good idea. But overall, I try to avoid the IV, although it can be useful in some cases.
Well, the brand is very elegant, and I appreciate how thoughtful you guys have been addressing. Because in a way, it's even sometimes the fun part. Like, hey, get jacked up or calm down and sleep. For me, sleep was the first one I reached for. Dr. Sherr, it's people like you that make me, I have a lot of conversations where it's people combining, pulling together this holistic and naturopathic, but real doctors who are saying, hey, let's also care for the system, and being, in this space, this aggressive doing it. I really appreciate it because I feel like we went so far the other way that now we're getting this opportunity to offer people these options that really could give them this long-term, well-being.
Yeah. I like to think of myself as a conductor of all things health optimization.
That's great.
And it's not just me. I think that's important, right?
Of course.
I have a ton of allies and people that I work with very closely that do all crazy things that I don't do. And I'm very much of a multidisciplinary kind of guy. I don't ever think that I can do everything. And I am a generalist by training. I'm an internal medicine physician. And I have specialties in the things that I do, and the things that I don't do as a specialty, I refer out for all the time. Yeah. And I think that's really where medicine is going. And I think you're seeing it in the conventional world and in cancer care. Actually, they have multidisciplinary teams that are working together, but you don't only see that outside of cancer. Yeah. But from an integrative perspective, the best way to work with a provider is not just working with one provider. Mm-hmm. It's working with a network of providers that are with the same kind of ethos, that are working in where there's at least one quarterback involved. And that's important because I find I have a lot of people that come to me that have maybe 4 or 5 doctors, but nobody's talking to each other.
Yeah, you need a translator.
You need somebody that could be like that conductor. That's what I try to do. And all the products that we make, as you know, it's not just about taking the product. It's about what else are you doing to support the system. Should you do meditation? Should you start doing breath work to calm down your nervous system? Absolutely. Is that going to be more sustainable long-term than taking Trocom? Yes. Mm-hmm. But if you need it in a pinch, or you need to feel what it feels like to feel parasympathetic right now, then this is what you can do, right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't go well with a company that's trying to make money, but the idea is that hopefully you don't need our products over the long term, at least most of them all the time, and you can use them as needed when you're traveling or having more stress or whatever, but you're not using them every day if you don't need them. And that's what I hope with my patients. I'm working on their sleep. Here's some Troz-E to get you started, and then let's work on your sleep routine. Let's work on your exposures to light at night, or your stress, your snoring partner, whatever it might be.
Oh yeah. Light at night.
And sleep divorces.
Oh.
Yeah, you know the sleep divorce?
I do.
Yeah, that's a big thing. About 50% of U.S. adults do not sleep in the same bed as their spouse.
I don't think that's good. I understand everybody's sleeping, but I think there's something that happens if you can by sleeping in the same space.
Agree.
There's some kind of exchange.
I know.
I don't know. But are you kidding? Sometimes I have a friend who did teach me that her and her husband now, they have their own blankets. So just that little change where he's not pulling on her sheet or she's not pulling on him, she said it was a game changer.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Having some separation there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a snoring partner,
it's brutal.
They've done studies where even if you think you're sleeping all night, your cortisol level rises every time they snore. Every time they snore.
Come on.
Every time.
Really?
Yeah. So you don't wake up as restless as you can. So get them a sleep machine, get them a sleep test, and have them wear a machine. Maybe that's good white noise for you in the background. But again, sleep is such an important thing that we need. And Dr. Ted likes to say that your day doesn't start when you wake up. Your day starts when you go to bed. Like that's the first thing you should be doing every day. And if you use that as your barometer, then your day is going to get better. The first thing you check off every day is you got your sleep.
I had a good sleep.
Yeah.
That's been my thing. I'm always trying to wrestle to the ground. Well, Dr. Scott Sherr, people, if they're interested in the products, they can go to troscriptions.com.
Yep.
And if they want to see, because you talk about a lot of things, and you guys also have a podcast, Smarter Not Harder, and you have different hosts and a lot of great topics. I really appreciated the Dr. Ted and Jack Cruz.
Yeah.
That was the tamest I ever heard Dr. Cruz.
Yeah.
It was incredible. And talking about, I encourage people to listen to it because really learning about latitude and light, we're not going to get into it today because it's very complicated. And blue light and, all of that. I've gone from thinking food calm, stress, food, movement. And I've actually, in our house, I think we slid sunlight all the way back up to the top of the list.
Yeah.
After that, minimizing exposure to non-native blue light and making sure you're outside.
Yes.
So if people want to learn and just even listen to that, because you have a lot of smart people interviewing smart people.
Yeah, it's fun. I like to interview a lot of my clinician colleagues.
Yeah, it's great.
And so lots of frameworks, and I appreciate that because it's fun for me
it's great.
to go on the other side of the mic and ask the questions too.
Yeah. Now, if I missed anything or there was an important invitation you wanted to make for people just from your point of view, now would be the time to do it.
Sure.
If I missed it at all.
No, I think we covered a lot. I think from a places to check us out, troscriptions.com is the website, @troscriptions on Instagram. If you're interested in a nonprofit, if you're a clinician or somebody that sees patients or clients, you're looking for a framework, we have a fantastic one, I think. It's focused on optimizing health rather than treating disease. We like to think of us as creating the first standard of care for health rather than everything being the standard of care for disease. There's no standard of care for health, so we're creating that right now, and we've been doing it. And it's a 7-module certification. You can check it out at homehope.org. And we have our first module called Metabolomics that we do cohort style, so you can learn in small groups. So we'd love if anybody was interested in training. Again, it's our nonprofit organization, homehope.org. And then if you're interested in stuff that I do personally, you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Scott Sherr. My Hyperbaric consulting is at integrativehbot.com. That's where I do all my consulting with people all over the world. And then my Hyperbaric company is called One Base Health. And so that's another place you guys can check me out or check the stuff that we're doing. And yeah, you can find me in Colorado if anybody's, going skiing. I'm not that far from the mountains typically.
Your dad must be really excited about this.
He is the greatest fan. The thing about my father, he's always been, even if I haven't done what he's potentially wanted me to do, is that he's always gotten behind anything that I've done, whether it was as a kid playing soccer or was as a young adult, going to medical school or getting involved in hyperbaric therapy, Methylene Blue. He's always been, if you go to his office right now in New York, he has all of our products there. Yeah. He's the biggest seller of our products in the country because that's just what he does. Yeah. And so when he gets behind something, he's very passionate about it. So he's my first mentor, and I have a lot of respect, and I actually had him on our podcast, which was fun. It just came out a couple of weeks ago.
I saw that.
Oh, you did?
I did, yeah.
It was one of the most fun episodes that I've ever recorded because I was learning about things that he had never told me all these years that I've known him, right? So it's fun. I think he's very proud. He's not the kind of guy that would outwardly say that all the time, but I know that's what he feels. And so, it was always fun being in his ecosystem, and now being able to create my own, as a context of everything that I do, and his foundation being there as part of what I do.
That's right. Well, I appreciate your time, and I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing, because really, honestly, selfishly, as a consumer and as a parent, you were talking to my daughter about her travels using the product as a tool. I really appreciate it, and thanks for your time.
This has been fantastic. Thank you for having me, Gabby.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for spending some time with me. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you did, feel free to share it with your friends, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, I want to hear from you. Tell me what's working, what's resonating with you, and how you're getting it done. Keep going.